7:07 p.m. I want to thank everybody for coming out to be with us this evening. We will start our meeting with an open ceremony. Please join Melody Fowler in leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and please be seated. Please silence all cell phones and electronic devices to avoid any disruptions to those around you. And now, if you would please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. The first item on our agenda is presentation. The first presentation is recognition of our J. Woodrow Count Scholarship recipients. Will Talisha Brown, Director of Guidance and Counseling, please come to the podium?
Good evening.
Good evening.
President Reich, Dr. Cavasso, members of the board. For me to present the recipients of the 2019 J. Woodrow Count Scholarship. A committee at each high school selects the application of an outstanding senior to be considered by the final selection committee. The J. Woodrow Count Scholarship is awarded for the purpose of advancing students' education at an institution of higher learning. The recipients are seniors who have earned high academic achievements, demonstrated strong leadership qualities, and possess a unique combination of talents. Before presenting this award, let me give you a short biography of Mr. Counts. He was born in Bynum, Texas. He grew up there and graduated from Bynum High School. He attended that is now called the University of North Texas on a basketball scholarship. After college, he served his country during World War II as a U.S. naval officer. In 1949, Mr. Count began his educational career with Arlington Independent School District, where he spent 36 years before retiring as superintendent in 1985. The J. Woodrow Counts Administration Building is named in his honor. Mr. Counts took great pride in the Arlington schools, the personnel, and students who strive to make it an outstanding system. He died in October 2006 at the age of 90. His legacy will live on through the scholarship that he established and funded. It is my pleasure to present the 2018-2019 J. Woodrow Counts Scholarship recipients. Will Ruben Barone please come to the podium? Ruben attends Sam Houston High School. He graduated from Sam Houston High School, and we are very proud of him. Congratulations. Our second recipient is Landry Billenfield. Landry was unable to be here today due to his attendance at his campus award ceremony. We've already presented his award to him. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Brown, and once again, congratulations to Ruben and to Landry. Congratulations on that honor. Next presentation we have is recognition of our AISD principals and assistant principals of the year. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays. And at this time, I'd like to ask Dr. Christy Buell to come forward and present our principal and assistant principal of the year. By the way, they've already been recognized and notified and all that. This is our formal introduction to the board, and we're so proud of them. And thank you in advance to our area superintendents and the staff that put this together, this rigorous process to identify our top assistant principals and principal for the year. So Christy.
Thank you very much, and greetings, Board President Mays and Dr. Cavazos and board members. This is a highlight of my year, and so I really look forward to this point each year. It's my honor tonight to introduce the principals of the year, the assistant principals of the year, the dean of the year, and our new rookie principal of the year. This year, we had 28 administrators that were nominated for these awards. Parents and teachers made the nominations. This is a celebration to have so many of our learning communities recognize outstanding leadership in their schools. After the nominations were received, we convened a committee with representation across the district departments and included our administrators of the year from 2017 and 18 in the process. All nomination packets were reviewed by the committee, and we narrowed it down to 13 finalists, which represented all of these positions. All finalists were interviewed by the committee. Teachers and leadership team members were also interviewed, and the committee conducted site visits to each campus to observe the administrators' leadership in action. The site visits were a highlight of the process. As you can see, this was quite a rigorous process. All finalists and nominees should be honored, and we are proud of each and every one of them. At this time, I'd like to introduce the Arlington ISD Administrators of the Year and share with you a few words from their nominating committee. The AISD Elementary Principal of the Year is Dr. Stephanie Lee from Peach Elementary, and I'd like to ask her to come forward. So Dr. Lee was the first principal of Eddie and Debbie Peach Elementary. Since the opening of the campus, the school has continued to make significant progress under her leadership. As the leader of the campus, she maintains high expectations for staff and students. Her staff describe her as being a positive administrator and creating a strong school culture. One staff member said, "Peach is the place to be. The morale is amazing." And another said, the best thing about Peach is the student culture, and I would concur with that. Dr. Lee supports staff and helps them to be their very best for kids every day. I'll finish with a few quotes from the Peach staff regarding the positive impact that Dr. Lee has on our learning community. She makes good news calls to every day to parents and also to the families of teachers. She is always present. She is wise. She shows me that I can be a leader at the campus since I don't want to go into administration. She values my input and my opinion. She is always positive, and that is passed along to the students and staff. You'll have your other colleagues join you. The AISD Secondary Principal of the Year is Fernando Benavides from Sam Houston High School. Come on forward. As the leader of Sam Houston High School, Mr. Benavides has brought about significant change. With his eyes focused on excellence for all students, graduation rates have increased over 11% from 2011 to 2018 school year. Academic achievement has also improved. As principal, Mr. Benavides strives to be a leader that sets aside a personal agenda and embraces a greater agenda for serving others. His goal as a leader is to be of service to others and other people's success. During his tenure as principal, he has mentored numerous other educators in their pursuit of career in administration. He is 100% committed to the team and to their development. His staff are quoted as saying, "Mr. Benavides has been an advocate for Sam Houston High School students since his days of being an assistant principal. His passion for the work is evident through his actions that he takes and his drive to ensure student success. Mr. Benavides sets high expectations for teachers and students that challenge the status quo and further develop all team members." Congratulations. I'd also like to bring up our AISD Elementary Assistant Principal of the Year, Bianca Golston from Atherton Elementary. Ms. Colston is an advocate for parent and community involvement. She embraces each child's personalized learning needs as if they were her own, and she reaches within and beyond the school walls to coordinate resources, manpower, and family buy-in to ensure success. She knows parents and community members are an integral part of the school community. Relationships among parents have been cultivated, and their sense of pride and ownership has spread throughout the community. She accepts nothing less than a can-do attitude in the school community's ability to meet the needs of students and maintain the highest expectations for all. She leads with positivity and a goal of helping everyone in the school community to do their best and feel valued. Congratulations. I'd also like to call up our AISD Secondary Assistant Principal of the Year, Ebony Nix from Bailey Junior High. Ms. Nix can be described as an advocate for students and staff. She is passionate about social-emotional learning and the positive impact that it has on students. She is also dedicated to supporting staff in their growth and development. During the 2018-19 school year, she served as a mentor for several aspiring administrators. Her staff is quoted as saying, "Ms. Nix leads with grace and integrity. Her expectations are extremely high. However, the support that she gives adults makes them successful at achieving hard things." Bailey Junior High continues to thrive under her current leadership team, for which she is an integral part. Thank you. I'd also like to welcome up our AISD Dean of the Year, Kirsten Lundeen from Seguin High School. According to staff, Ms. Lundeen is known as the counselor of teachers. She is always leveraging her relational capacity to provide actionable feedback for staff. She is supportive of teachers and helps them continually grow and develop. Her staff is quoted as saying, "Because of her consistency and dependability, this campus has an enduring identity that thrives on solution-focused teachers, student-focused outcomes, and teacher-driven learning experiences. She is consistent, caring, and collaborative. She is the heart of the campus." We had a number of new principals this year, and so we added one category, which is our Rookie Principal of the Year. We know that this is a big undertaking, and we're just proud of all the work of all of our brand new principals this year, but we'd like to recognize one. And our AISD Rookie Principal of the Year is Casey Longoria from Hill Elementary. Ms. Longoria has thrived as a first-year principal at Hill Elementary. She is deeply committed to building positive and supportive relationships with students, teachers, and the community. In a recent Pulse survey, 100% of the Hill staff agreed or strongly agreed to the following questions. I have warm feelings towards my school as a workplace. I enjoy working at this school, and I like the way the school is run. She believes in creating a positive school culture where teachers are engaged and committed to excellence. She also insists on a quality learning environment for all students. She works with staff to promote experiences for kids that leverage their strengths and their talent. She supports teachers to provide learning environments where students can excel. She also values parent and community involvement. During the 2018-19 school year, she coordinated porch visits for all of her families as a way of emphasizing the importance of the home and the school partnership. They have also had numerous other parent involvement activities, including popsicles with the principal, school-wide family picnic, the Hill 50th anniversary, which was great, and monthly coffee with the principal to get feedback. I'm proud of her leadership as a first-year principal, and I'm excited about the continued impact she'll have at Hill Elementary. It was a highlight of my year to engage in this process, and we're blessed to have so many highly effective principals in AISD. It's my privilege to introduce to you our Administrators of the Year.
Thank you, Dr. Buell. And while they're lining up to take their picture, just want to say on behalf of the school board. We really appreciate everything that y'all do in the classroom as administrators over the schools. Y'all definitely help to make our job better. So congratulations to each and every one of you. Next, we will consider administrative appointments. Dr. Cavazos?
Thank you, President Mays. I'd like to recommend the board ratify the appointment of the individuals discussed in closed session for principal of Sam Houston High School, principal of Anderson Elementary, principal of South Davis Elementary, assistant principal for Martin High School, and assistant principal for Mary Moore Elementary.
Do we have a motion to approve the administrative appointments as discussed in executive session? Can't do it yet. There you go.
Thank you, President Mays. I move that we accept the recommendations from administration in all cases.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Justin. So we've got a motion by Polly, a second by Justin. Mr. Chapa, any discussions? Okay, seeing none, please vote. Okay, so it's unanimous, all yes.
Thank you, President Mays. And so again, this is a ratification. We've had the opportunity since this time of year to introduce the principals to their staff, et cetera. So first, I'd like to introduce the new principal for Sam Houston High School, Mr. Juan Villarreal. Juan attended Angelo State University in San Angelo for his Bachelor of Arts in Spanish, Sul Ross State University for his Master of Ed in Ed Administration. Most recently, the principal of Gunn Junior High, has been the principal of Turning Point High School, has been an assistant principal at Martin High School, also has been an assistant principal in 2 schools in Fort Worth ISD, has been a Spanish and AP Spanish teacher, coach in Reagan County ISD, as well as a Spanish teacher and coach in Water Valley ISD. Juan, congratulations.
Thank you. President Mays, school board members, Dr. Cavazos, and Dr. Brown, thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve as principal at Sam Houston High School. I want to thank the staff at Gunn Junior High for the support they provided to me the last 5 years. It was an amazing 5 years. 4 years of obtaining 7 out of 7 distinctions and hoping that we do it again this year. Becoming a model school last year and having the privilege to present with a great team of teachers and an administrator at the Model School Conference last summer. I know that they will continue to do their very best to help our students and community. I will miss them and I wish them the best. I also want to thank Trustee Buell, Dr. Trustee Buell, for her guidance and support, and I want to wish Area 1 the best as well. Now I look forward to working at Sam Houston High School to leverage the wonderful things that Mr. Benavides has started and continue the success of collaborating with administrators and teachers. I know that if I approach my new leadership role with kindness, support, and respect for our staff, our students, and for our community, that we will continue to steer our school in the right direction. I had the privilege to visit Sam Houston yesterday. The staff was welcoming, and it is evident that they are passionate and proud of our school. So it is my responsibility to build strong relationships of trust with our staff, students, Sam Houston High School alumni, and community to ensure the success of all students and staff. I look forward to starting our journey of continued success. Now, I do have some family members. I have my wife, Cindy, and my son, Cameron. I get really emotional when I talk about them, but I could not do the work that I do without their support and daily understanding of me changing schedules constantly, and because, as you know, our work never finishes. I also want to introduce my in-laws, Ken Flannery and B. Flannery, and my sister-in-law, Sherry Flannery. They're great supporters, and they always pitch in when I'm calling last minute that I cannot do certain things, so I appreciate y'all. Again, thank you for this wonderful blessing. I'm gonna own my job. I'm gonna give it 100%. I will make sure that our district is proud of the work that we do. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to introduce the new principal for Anderson Elementary, Ms. Angela Perugine. Angela attended the University of Texas at Arlington for Bachelor of Arts in Criminology and Criminal Justice, University of Texas at Arlington for Master of Ed in Ed Leadership. Most recently, the assistant principal at Thornton Elementary School, has been a bilingual fourth grade language arts teacher at Patrick, has been a bilingual fourth grade language arts teacher at Crouch, and a bilingual fourth and fifth grade language arts teacher at Anderson Elementary as well. Angela, congratulations.
Thank you. President Mays, members of the board, Dr. Cavazos, thank you for this opportunity. My journey in Arlington ISD began as a student over 20 years ago when my family and I moved here from Venezuela. I finished my schooling here, I started my career here, and I feel very fortunate to still be in AISD. Being an educator was not my original plan. I did not know that taking a teaching assistant position my junior year in college would change the direction of my future. It was at Anderson Elementary that I fell in love with teaching, I fell in love with the community, I fell in love with seeing students' light bulb come on, and I fell in love with knowing the impact that I can make on my students. From then on, I was hooked. I have worked at several schools, but my constant has always been the community I fell in love with 11 years ago. I'm excited to start this new journey at Anderson, and I'd like to thank a few people who have helped me along the way. First, I want to thank my mom for always being there for me, 100%. Pushing, challenging, and supporting me every step of the way. Thank you to everyone who guided me through the interview process, Dr. Orsini, Matt Brown, Melinda Schweig, Brenda Allen, the list goes on, everybody helped. And to Dr. Brown and the interview committees for entrusting me with this position. To my Thornton family, you treated me with grace and patience. It was an honor to serve you. A special thank you to Ms. Alicia Rodriguez for all the lessons, guidance, and for tolerating my questions, silliness, and everything in between. She knows what I'm talking about. I am excited to serve the Anderson community, staff, and students once again. I know that together we will do great things to change student outcomes. Finally, I feel that every school we work at becomes our home, and I am elated to be coming back home. Anderson, let's show the world what we're made of.
Next, I'd like to introduce the principal for South Davis Elementary, Ms. Deborah Wall.
I paid them.
Deborah attended Tarleton State University for Bachelor of Science in Elementary Ed, University of Phoenix for Master of Ed in Administration and Supervision. Most recently, the principal of Wimbish Elementary, has also been a Dean of Instruction at Wimbish, has also been an RTI specialist, literacy coach, and 504 coordinator in Eagle Mountain, Saginaw. Assistant principal in Keller, campus curriculum coach in Northwest ISD, and a gifted and talented coordinator teacher in Brock ISD. Deborah, congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you, President Mays, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos. I come before you tonight to thank you for the opportunity to serve Wimbish Elementary as principal. To my Wimbish family, you are the most dedicated and committed staff that I've ever had the pleasure of serving. We encountered and conquered many challenges together and have overcome many obstacles with commitment. Knowing that work that we did for our students impacted their futures. I observed you walk in strong to that building, and this year I've watched you leave stronger than ever before. Always remember, I want all of you to be the exception, okay? I wish you the best in your new positions. And now for the new. I'm very honored and excited to continue my administrative journey at South Davis Elementary School. I met the staff yesterday and they were very welcoming, and it was a pleasure to see their faces. I would like to thank Dr. Christy Buell for never-ending support, advice, coaching, and for pushing my thinking when I needed it the most. And to my family who's here with me today, Greg Magellan, who is my son's new wife. He just got married, and my son Chase, and my daughter who couldn't be here, They are my world, and I love them very much, and I appreciate all the support that they've given me through the years. I'm so eager to join the Bulldog team as we come together to serve the incredible families of South Davis Elementary, and I'm excited about becoming a South Davis Bulldog.
Next, I'll introduce Christy Graham, the assistant principal for Martin High School. She's unable to be here tonight, so she'll be introduced at a future board meeting as well. Next, we move on to the assistant principal for Mary Moore Elementary, Mr. Trevor Crawford. Trevor attended Baylor University for his Bachelor of Science in Early Childhood, University of Texas Arlington for Master of Ed in Leadership and Policy Studies. Most recently, a third grade teacher in Birdville ISD and has taught first and fourth grade in Birdville as well. Trevor, congratulations.
Thank you. President Mays, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos, thank you for this incredible opportunity. I'm so excited to serve, learn, and lead at Moore Elementary. I can already tell it truly is a special place, and I'm so honored to be a Texan. I would not be here without the support of my family, Shannon, my beautiful wife, and our two awesome kids, Noah and Ivy. Shannon, thank you for pushing me, helping me, and being my companion in life. Noah and Ivy, thank you for the joy that you bring us. I also know that I would not be here without the love, support, and prayers from my family and friends. I truly feel blessed to be standing here right now. I'd also like to thank Nathan Prang for giving me the opportunity to lead with him at Moore. I can't wait to see where this journey in Arlington leads, but I know it will be a great destination because of the incredible people that are part of AISD.
Next, we'll do a couple of introductions. They've been appointed in May, but they weren't able to join us at the time. So introducing our new assistant principal for the Arlington College and Career High School, Miss Amy Cunningham. Amy attended Texas A&M University. I paused to give him a chance to do it. It is actually, yeah. So Bachelor of Science in Health, Tarleton State University for Master of Ed in Elementary Education. Most recently, our 504 Dyslexia and RTI Coordinator. Has also been an assistant principal at Wood Elementary. Has been a reading specialist and dyslexia instructional specialist for Mansfield ISD. Second grade teacher in Keller. Fourth and third grade ESL. Teacher in Fort Worth, and kinder and third grade teacher in Granbury. Amy, congratulations.
Thank you. President Mays, members of the board, Dr. Cavazos, thank you so much for this opportunity. I am looking forward to working with the small but mighty Titans this coming fall. We are looking forward to opening the new school. Dr. Bolin, Dr. Jarko, thank you for this amazing opportunity. Having the last 3 years working with the entire AISD staff at every single level, many of them in this room tonight, I have so many people to thank. Of course, starting with my family. 6 years ago, I got to tell my family thank you over AISD-TV Live. My parents are watching right now. So hi, Mom and Dad. My son is even watching tonight. He is a Colt, starting his sophomore year soon. And my daughter is here. She has been on this journey the whole way. My husband, his hands probably still sore from all the lamination, handing out textbooks throughout the years, counting them all during that first AP job and being there, as Mr. Villarreal said, doing everything that is needed in order for me to live out that passion that I've had these 20 plus years. It takes all of us to support our students. And I could not have done it without my family and without all of these amazing educators in these rooms. So thank you to the teachers, the staff, the parents. It takes all of us, and I am so excited for this journey, so thank you.
Last but certainly not least, we have a Director of Facilities Planning and Construction to introduce, and that is Mr. Michael Parkos. Mike attended Texas A&M University for Bachelor of Environmental Design. Most recently was the Interim Director of Facility Planning and Construction, has also been a Senior Project Manager with us here in Arlington. Has been an Associate in Construction Services for HKS Architect, a Project Manager with several companies, a Senior Project Manager and a Project Engineer with Charter Builders. And so, Michael, congratulations.
Thank you. President Mays, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. I would also like to thank Cindy Powell, Kelly Horn, and the interview committee members, Tommy Moore, Eric White, Tammy Craig, David Lewis, and Tony Drollinger for having faith in me to fill this role. My family isn't available to be here tonight. My parents are actually moving up here from Corpus Christi, and my stepsister, who's an elementary school principal in Plano, told me, quote, I have end of school things to do. I'm not sure what that means. I've spent the last 25 years in the design and construction of K-12 educational facilities, but I have to say the most rewarding time has been my last 2 years here at Arlington ISD. To see the excitement of the students when they moved into the Ag Science Center with their animals, the sense of wonder that on the faces of the students at Key Elementary when they saw the new STEM labs, and a standing applause I received from the Martin High School drama students when we renovated their new stage and auditorium. These are just a few of the many rewards that I've enjoyed while being here at Arlington ISD. And I've been privileged to help wrap up the 2014 bond program, and excited to see the progress of the new Fine Arts Center and Athletic Center. And I'm looking forward to our future opportunities to do even more great things here for the students and community of Arlington ISD. Thank you.
Well, congratulations all, and gosh, if I can just hear that one more time. And from Texas A&M University. Love it.
Rub it in.
I just wanted to hear it. Okay, so one thing that Dr. Reich taught me was, as president, you can flip the script. So I flipped the script a little bit. So now going back to another presentation, our last presentation of this evening, and that is recognizing our outgoing board president, Dr. Reich. So, Dr. Reich, the board would like to thank you for your leadership over the last 2 years. A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So thank you for continuing the path of sustainability, the path of transparency, and a team of mentality that AISD is a wonderful place to be. You now join the ranks of many of our past presidents, and I'm honored tonight to be able to present to you a plaque. So once again, thank you so very much for your leadership. And as our immediate past president, we know you will continue your advocacy for our students, for the community, and for our teachers. And thank you very, very much. Now, if you would like to say a few words, you can. And then after that, we're going to go down and take a picture.
You have to turn my mic on. Is it on? There we go. Very good. Well, it's a little bit awkward being recognized like this. Thank you very much, Mrs. Mays, to the entire board team. Thank you. It has been an honor to have the privilege to serve by your side in a leadership capacity of this board. It has been a fast and furious 2 years. I made a promise at the beginning of this that we would stay cohesive as a team and function as one for the betterment of students, to make sure that we all always have student achievement forefront of our minds and meeting our strategic plan goals, that 100% of our students will graduate college career ready and be good citizens as well. And I commend each and every one of you. Well, you just got here, so. But in all fairness, he's been there in every committee in every capacity. So you all, I believe we have stayed together as a cohesive team with that vision in mind, and it has been wonderful to continue, I think, the legacy of this board in having that sense of team and that sense of commitment and leadership as a whole. And I won't mention specific other districts, but they don't always function that way on the dais, and we do. And President Mays, I leave this in your very capable hands of continuing that progression of that vision moving forward to make sure that 100% of our students everywhere are going to be valued and represented, and we're going to do everything we can from a budgetary standpoint, a policy standpoint, a leadership standpoint, to continue to have those opportunities avail to the students and as much access as humanly possible for those students. I would say we are in great hands. Thank you, Dr. Cavazos. It's been a pleasure working with you over the past 2 years in this role. And exceptional leadership is from the top down and everywhere in this district. And I'm not just talking about, as we have witnessed here tonight, our principals and assistant principals and the winners of the dean of the year, et cetera. It's within every teacher, every educator, every staff person in this district. Everybody I have seen has stepped up because of having care, compassion, love, and passion for our students so that they can become amazing things and realize what their potential truly is, which sometimes they don't know, and you open their eyes to it. So Dr. Cavazos, senior staff who we've worked with so closely, thank you very much for your dedication and your passion. And to everybody in this district, it's a joy to be able to serve in this capacity. And I look forward to sitting here, not in the driver's seat very much, but I know we are in capable hands, and to our new Vice President, Mr. Hogg, who is a past president, in great position to give us a leadership of strength here on this board. And Ms. Walton, congratulations on being secretary as well. So thank you very much. It truly has been an honor to have the privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So before I step down there, as is our custom, we ask that once we are done taking our picture, that our appointees please follow Mr. Kell outside so we can all go out and greet you. We ask for the audience to please allow the board to go first so that we can come back and take care of our business. I would also like for our vice presidents, vice principals, and our principals of the year to please also join our appointees, and dean. Please join our appointees outside so that we can also congratulate you as well. This is awesome plaque.
Hey, Ms. Mays, I'll go ahead and send us into a 10-minute recess.
Okay, I now call this meeting back to order. Now we come to our open forum of agenda items. Lisa, are there any cards? Okay. There are no cards, so we will continue on the agenda. Next on our agenda is action items. Dr. Cavazos?
Thank you, President Mays. And we have brought for discussion the last board meeting, the 1920 Board of Trustees meeting calendar. We've made the necessary adjustments for conferences and things that usually adjust our schedule, and so we bring that back for your consideration.
Okay. Okay, so traditionally in June, the board does adopt a meeting calendar for the upcoming year. This action item will give board members, staff, and the community advance notice of when the board will consider school district business. The calendar dates were previously presented at the May 16, 2019 board meeting, as stated by Dr. Cavazos. Do I have a motion?
Ms. Mays, thank you. And I'll make a motion in just a second. I just asked this board, in June of next year, we have two meetings on the 16th and 23rd, and that's from us determining whether we go to San Antonio or Fort Worth for the SLI. I would just ask us, I think we approve it as it is, and then we'd be willing to make the adjustment once we decide where we're going so that we can stay consistent as much as possible for Thursday meetings. But with that, I move for approval of our 2019-2020 board calendar.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Hogg and a second by Dr. Reich. Are there any discussions? If not, please vote. Okay, all those present, vote in the affirmative. Next on our agenda item for action is considering the nomination of an Arlington ISD trustee for the Region 11, Position A, seat on the Texas Association of School Boards of Directors. Mr. Hogg.
Thank you, Ms. Mays. This is to represent and be considered and go through the process. This is just one of many steps in the process to consider this. At this time, for a nomination from the AISD trustee for Region 11, Position A, just to be nominated in the first step of the process, I'd like to nominate Mr. Justin Chapa, who I think would be an outstanding potential member of the TASB board.
Okay, do I have a second? A second. Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Hogg, a second by Mr. Wilbanks. Any discussion? Please vote. Okay, so we have 6 in the affirmative, 1 abstain. We will not have him explain his abstention. Congratulations, Justin, for stepping up to be representing. Thank you very much.
Make sure you mention that Justin was
there. Oh, did I not say that? Okay, the 1 abstention was Mr. Chapa. Okay, once again, thank you, Mr. Chapa. Next item on the agenda are items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda. Are there any items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none. Tonight we will be considering the items listed on the agenda under consent items. Mrs. Powell?
President Mays, board members, Dr. Cavazos, good evening. Tonight we have for your consideration 7 bids, and in all cases the administration recommends the lowest bids and the bids that represent the best value to the district. We also have donations this evening totaling $359,286, which brings our year-to-date total to $1,361,694.
Okay. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda? Everybody.
Move to approve.
Second? Ms. Walton? Say it loud, thank you.
I second the motion.
Okay. So there's a motion by Dr. Reich, a second by Ms. Walton. Is there any discussion? If not, please vote. Okay, all in affirmative. Consent items pass. Okay, next on the agenda, moving on, is discussion items. First up are legislative updates. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mason. This evening we'll bring a legislative update. It'll be maybe one of our final ones. We still have David Anderson, our consultant, to come back at some point in August, but Ms. Powell will make a legislative update. It's fitting that we have this update before we have our budget discussion because there's so many implications on that. So, Ms. Powell.
Thank you, President Mays, board members, Dr. Cavazos, and this will be hopefully the last legislative update I give this session. Our legislative consultant with Hilco Partners, we do anticipate will be here later this summer to give a wrap-up of the session. What I want to talk about this evening are some things that occurred right at the tail end of the session. When Mr. Anderson comes, he will speak more comprehensively across the entire session and the outcomes of the entire session. So with that, we know that the legislature has adjourned. They met for 140 days. They actually, from our perspective, they got quite a lot done. This session, I think more than any, as I've watched, you really see what a typical cycle is. Things start kind of slowly with just legislators working on their own legislation, being appointed to committees and what have you. In the middle part of the session is all about committee meetings, and the pace kind of begins to pick up just a little bit. And finally, the last 2 or 3 weeks is just a mad rush to the end, and that certainly was the case here. With some very significant legislation that was not finalized until the very, very tail end of the session, literally the last few days. So with that and the adjournment of the legislature, the work doesn't stop, actually. The governor has until June 16th to veto any legislation. He can also sign legislation into law. Anything he doesn't sign becomes law without his signature. Rulemaking takes place next. What I usually say is that the legislature enacts laws and all the state agencies implement those laws. And so all the state agencies and most certainly Texas Education Agency will now set the rules that implement the laws that were passed by the legislature. That work will take place over many, many months, and sometimes things come out of that process that maybe were not real clear up front when a bill was being considered. And so that's something that we had to be mindful of and watch for as well along the way, and certainly weigh in where appropriate. That rulemaking then will also generate changes to board policy potentially, and the new laws themselves do. And so Texas Association of School Boards, their policy services will be reviewing the laws that were passed by the legislature and updating board policies as appropriate. And so we will see a number of policy updates over the next year, literally, all making legal changes that occurred during the legislative session. So our work has not ended, but certainly the session is done. So just to kind of give you a sense, there are several years worth of sessions listed here, and you can see that in this current session, the legislature passed about 20% of the bills that were filed, and that's pretty much in line with previous sessions. One thing of note that I had heard was that the House actually passed more bills in this section than they have at any time since 2001. So they were busy. They appeared to be quite organized and very efficient in how they went about their business. So in terms of our own advocacy efforts, I have to commend the board for the effort that the board and the commitment that the board has made towards this work over the last several sessions. Once again, the district has adopted a legislative agenda for the session, and that guided our work and our advocacy efforts throughout the session. In terms of making our voice heard, we filed 53 position letters, so 53 letters on 53 different bills as they were heard in committee. We also provided testimony in committees on 3 different bills, and then had extensive conversations with our legislators that began really before the session began. We met with our legislators late last fall to go through our legislative agenda. They have been very receptive and accessible to us throughout the session. Some of the board members and myself, Dr. Cavazos, have made several trips to Austin to meet with individual legislators. Dr. Cavazos participated in an advisory group that the Lieutenant Governor formed with various superintendents across the state, large districts and small districts, and that gave us a really unique opportunity throughout the session to voice concerns and preferences specific to Arlington about a number of bills and a number of topics. And so there were several meetings held of that group throughout the session. Similarly, we participated in the Texas School Alliance. We also were asked to participate, invited to participate in several meetings held by Commit Texas in Dallas, where Todd Williams hosted forums for superintendents and CFOs and chief academic officers from around the area to talk about various issues. So it's something that takes a lot of time. I think we have found over the last several sessions that it is an investment that is well worth that time. And so it's something that I think that this board should be commended for in terms of level of effort and engagement. Our district has adopted a legislative policy. Just to summarize it here, there are three broad areas that that policy covers: local authority, and instructional programming that is supportive of and furthers the provisions of House Bill 5 that was passed in the 83rd legislative session, and then suitable funding, and also relief from unfunded mandates. And within that umbrella then, there were 5 broad areas that had more specific advocacy topics or positions of the district, and those included academic accountability, safety and mental health, school finance, and we break that down into several specific areas: school choice and pre-K. So the bills I'm going to talk about this evening are key ones that passed at the end of the session. I'm, again, not going to try to give an overview of the entire session. So at the very tail end of the session, there were 2 accountability bills that had been authored by Chris Turner that passed. They have similar requirements. One requires that TEA release to school districts data that the agency receives from other sources that they then use for determining accountability ratings. Similarly, there's a bill that would require the Higher Ed Coordinating Board to send to school districts data that they receive from other sources that they then pass on to TEA, so that TEA can use them in setting accountability ratings. And that was something that Dr. Barlow and Dr. Wirtz and Dr. Cavazos worked on quite a bit. And so that's something that should be beneficial for all school districts. House Bill 3906 was filed by Chairman Huberty. This is a bill that makes a number of changes to the accountability system and to the assessments, really, more than just straight up accountability. It actually eliminates the star writing test for 4th and 7th grades effective in 2021. It sets time limits on tests and actually also begins to transition the state to a fully electronic assessment system beginning in the 22-23 school year. House Bill 1 is the state budget bill, and the legislature really only has to pass one bill when they meet, and that is the state budget. And so they passed this one. The way that the order in which things occurred this session were they had to have some, amongst the leadership, they had determined that they needed to see agreement on House Bill 3, which is the school finance bill, and then on SB 2, which was for property tax relief, before they could then finalize House Bill 1. And so all 3 of those bills did pass at the end of the session. So House Bill 1, as it relates to public education, it included $9 billion for public education when that bill was first filed. The reality is the bills that have passed actually are going to cost an estimated $11.5 billion for public education and for property tax relief. And so the legislators identified several additional sources of monies beyond what was captured as part of the original budget to help fund that additional cost. And that included a revised revenue estimate from the comptroller late May, and then new sales tax revenue that they expect to receive as a result of a court ruling, $500 million, and then additional transfers from the permanent school fund of $600 million. This will actually require voter approval in November. That still leaves them with a gap of almost $800 million. So in House Bill 3, one of the things that, one of the provisions there is a requirement that the Legislative Budget Board actually study ways to further reduce property tax and to continue funding property tax reduction on an extended basis. And they are charged with supplying that report back to the legislature, back to the leadership by September 1 of 2020. So this is a topic I know Dr. Reich has asked about several times, and that is, will they be able to sustain this long term? And so that's something that obviously we will all be watching in the coming years with great interest. So House Bill 3 is the comprehensive school finance bill. There actually, in addition to school finance, there are several other things in here, and we'll touch on that as well. There's a lot of information, and I tried to capture a bunch of it in one slide, and it looks like the print was awfully tiny there. Probably should rethink that next time. But I tried to take this in several big pieces. So on this one slide are more the formula-related items. There are some formula changes to the foundation school program formulas, which is our state aid. When we talk about state aid, we're always talking about this. And thank you, Frank, made that bigger for us. And then also changes to property tax rates, and then some rules around tax ratification elections. So on the key formula changes, one of the primary things that the bill does is it increases the basic allotment. And the basic allotment is the one element that everything else uses in the formulas. So when we talk about how much a student generates in state funding, it starts with that basic allotment. The bill raises that amount by over $1,000 to $6,160. So that's about a 20% increase. And so again, you would take $6,160 times the average daily attendance for a district to get their regular program allotment. Then all the other special programs are weighted off of that. And so all these things sum together to generate our state aid. So that was a very key change that they made. Not all of that was new money. Some of that actually comes from the legislature eliminating some existing allotments that were inside of the formulas, and then taking the dollars that they had been spending on those allotments and just moving them into the basic allotment. And those included the cost of education index, and then also the gifted and talented allotment and the high school allotment, and a small allotment, staff allotment. The gifted and talented allotment our mandate does not go away, as you'll see shortly, but they just move those dollars over to the basic allotment. The bill also adds some new allotments, early education, dyslexia, and dual language. We'll talk more about those in just a minute. And then a major change that they made was shifting from using prior year values in the formulas to using current year values. We talk a lot about when property values go up, our state aid goes down. So the funding formulas total up to an entitlement. Districts, an amount that districts are entitled to for the basic cost of education. Districts then are expected to come up with a portion of that money themselves through their local property taxes, and that's called local share assignment. And up to this point, the formulas always use last year's property values to make that determination of what your local share was. Well, they've shifted that to current year values with this year. And if you think for a minute about the fact that generally, year to year to year to year, property values rise from one year to the next. In a year that we make that kind of a change, then there's a big jump in the values that are used to determine our local share, which would mean that we individually, individual districts, not just us, but individual districts are generally going to be responsible for a bigger portion of that entitlement in that 1 year. And in this particular year, as we're going to see in a few minutes in the next presentation, our local property values have jumped dramatically. And so that really makes the effect of that local share, that change from prior year values to current year values, even more pronounced for us. So you'll see the effect of that in a few minutes, but that was a major change that tended to impact urban districts and fast growth districts a lot more than it did rural and small districts where they tend to have pretty flat property values. Okay. We all talk about the enrichment pennies, those golden pennies and copper pennies. Those are still there. They took those and changed the mix. So they increased the number of golden pennies by 2 and decreased the number of copper pennies by 2. Golden pennies, what's interesting about those for a lot of districts is there's no recapture on those pennies of tax effort. That's of significance to a district that has already had maybe a TRE and was taxing above $1.06. That was helpful to them. We have, with our current tax rate, we tax 4 pennies that are eligible for that enrichment funding under the golden pennies. One other thing of note is they actually increased, or decreased rather, the yield on the golden pennies, and they increased the yield on the copper pennies. So again, all that is important if you're taxing above the Tier 1 rate. So in terms of property tax rates, one of the objectives of the state leadership was to grant tax relief. This bill in part does that. It requires all school districts to lower their tax rates, and it sets a new cap on tax rates. So that new cap will be $1.10 for us. You take the base rate of $1 times what they are calling the compression rate, which is 93%, and then you can add to that 17 cents. What that yields is for us, for Arlington ISD, a max tax rate of $1.17. It requires school districts to lower their tax rates this year, and for Arlington ISD, we'll be required to lower our tax rate by 7 cents. Districts that had already had a TRE and were taxing above $1.06, there's some additional compression that they are required to make. But for us, it's a 7 cent reduction. This year, the reduction is pretty clear to understand as far as how that's supposed to take place. Beginning next year, that gets very complex. Beginning the following next year, the bill will require what's called individualized compression, and that's where, depending on the growth in your local property values and the growth in property values across the state, TEA will determine what our maximum tax rates are. And so that's something that there's a lot of question about how that will happen going forward. TEA will actually make those calculations on what our maximum tax rates are. Part of the question is when they will do that and what kind of structure will be in place for them to do that, because today there is not a structure in place for appraisal districts like the Tarrant Appraisal District to send certified values to the Texas Education Agency in the year that those values are first certified. It's usually many months later that they provide that information to TEA. So there's an entire infrastructure that's going to have to be developed to even create that system so TEA can set those rates going forward. There's been at least some question asked about, well, will that possibly push back the dates that school districts can adopt their tax rates into September? And so that's, again, something that we will definitely have to watch. Beginning next year, also the bill will allow school districts to levy 1 additional penny within that golden penny range without having a TRE. So that's something that we will keep in mind going forward. Finally then, under the category of tax ratification elections, we all have had many discussions about the fact that given our circumstances with the current school finance system, that we were strongly thinking that we would need to have a tax ratification this upcoming fall to increase our ability to generate revenue to sustain our programming and to continue offering some new programming. With the money that we are expecting to get from House Bill 3 and other changes in our budget, we no longer think that that will be necessary for this year. We'll talk more about that as we get into the budget, but we don't anticipate that we will need a TRE in this upcoming fall. One thing it does require is before a district can have a TRE, you have to have an efficiency audit, and you have to have that a certain number of months before you have a TRE, and then you've got to post the results online. So again, there'll be some rulemaking around that. All right, other mandates in House Bill 3 include compensation. The directive is that school districts use 30% of the Chapter 48 gain, and Chapter 48 is the new section that's been created in the Education Code, and they've moved all of the definitions, all of the laws around the funding formulas from Chapter 42 into Chapter 48. So the bill requires that districts spend 30% of that Chapter 48 gain to give compensation increases to employees other than administrators, all right? And of that 30%, then school districts are required to spend 75% of that amount on teachers, counselors, librarians, and nurses for employee groups. For most districts, that's going to make up a little over half of your total employee base. So 75% of 30% of your gain has to be spent on raises for those employee groups, and you have to prioritize differentiated pay for teachers, classroom teachers with more than 5 years of experience. The other 25% of that 30% gain, the law says that money may be spent to give additional compensation increases to employees other than administrators. So again, questions here, and you'll hear this kind of as a theme throughout. There's still a lot of questions around the mechanics of this and the specific requirements. For example, what is an administrator? We're hearing consistent interpretations of that. But that's one question, one example of a question that is to be answered so that districts know how to correctly apply this particular mandate. Districts will be required to file a report with TEA by December 1, stating each individual and each individual employee and the raise that person was given that year. All right. Changes to existing allotments, and we'll go through a couple of these in particular. Career Tech, they've actually expanded the grade levels that are eligible for funding under Career Tech down to 7th grade. Gifted and Talented and the high school allotment, as we said a minute ago, those allotments, those separate allotments go away, but the dollars have just rolled into the basic allotment. Districts are still mandated to have a gifted and talented program, and you have to file a report with the commissioner each fall that says you've got the program that meets the program requirements set forth in a separate section of the Education Code. If a district for some reason did not have a gifted and talented program, the commissioner then would withhold money from the district's state funding formulas equal to what they would have generated the previous year under the old gifted and talented formula. So that's something, there was, again, no expectation that program go away, but the way the formula worked previously, all districts were capped out anyway. 5% of all students in ADA were eligible for that funding. So Virtually every district was already capped out on that funding, so it just made sense to move those dollars back into the basic allotment. Comp Ed state Comp Ed is an allotment that we have today, and that allotment has been intended to serve students who are at risk of dropping out of school. And the state defines at risk. There are 13 criteria, different criterion for that. Economically disadvantaged kids are not necessarily in and of themselves considered at-risk students. Yet the money, the way we get our money today for state Comp Ed is based on the kids who are eligible for free or reduced lunch. A major change that will occur through House Bill 3 is that there will be a wide range of funding, different funding weights given for state Comp Ed. Still, we will take students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch, but we have to report those students by their census block, and then the commissioner will identify 5 distinct buckets, if you will, of funding based on census blocks. The determination of with the greater funding tracking to those census blocks that have greater concentrations of poverty. It's not just poverty, though, that determines the cut points, if you will, for those different groups. The commissioner is also supposed to consider the level of educational attainment of people who live in that census block, the number of single-parent families in that census block, along with poverty information. So this is something that's very, very new to all of us and certainly to TEA. And so there again, rules will have to be made, and the agency will have to create a system for all of us to report our student addresses and attaching census block information to that. So. And then the transportation allotment, the state would use a linear density formula for determining funding. Now they're just going to a straight amount per mile, and that amount will be set in the budget each session. It's $1 right now. That actually yields a bit less than we are making currently on our transportation allotment based on our understanding of how that is supposed to be applied. But our understanding, we may get some clarity that helps, that causes us to change our interpretation of that. All right, early education allotment. This is a new allotment, and this is a significant additional funding source here within the foundation school formulas. This is the money that the legislature intends to fund full-day pre-K for districts. We will actually all receive funding based on the number of kids who are in grades kindergarten through 3 who are either economically disadvantaged or English language learners. The money can be spent then on grades pre-K through 3. And so it's supposed to be enough money to cover the cost of full-day pre-K. So if you just look at that allotment amount based on what we think it will cost us to implement full-day pre-K, it does appear that that allotment is sufficient to cover the cost of full-day pre-K. The bill also mandates that districts implement full-day pre-K beginning in this upcoming year. There's an opportunity for waivers for districts that would either have to, A, construct facilities, new facilities to accommodate full-day pre-K, or for districts who would, that would wind up serving fewer students by implementing full-day pre-K. What that means is if you are not able to hire enough qualified, properly certified staff to serve all students in a full-day setting, then in essence you would be reducing the number of students who could be served, and that's a reason for a waiver. The bill is actually worded such that it says that if a district submits a request for a waiver, that the commissioner shall grant that waiver. There appears to be no discretion on it. We actually had a conversation, Dr. Cavazos and I did, with the Commissioner of Education on a number of topics, and one of the things we mentioned to him was full-day pre-K in this mandate, and the fact that, you know, it's really difficult to find out on May 25th, when a bill passes, that you need to implement full-day pre-K that following August and get all that infrastructure in place and hire all the qualified, properly certified folks. And so the commissioner mentioned to us that he fully expected that most districts would have to ask for a waiver initially. So we'll have some additional conversation about that as we get into our budget presentation. The bill also adds several new allotments. These are much smaller in terms of the dollars. There's a new dyslexia allotment, a dual language allotment that actually includes just a very tiny amount of funding for non-English language learners who are in a dual language program. So based on our understanding of this at the moment, it appears that our students at Corey and at Jones and at Wimbish, who are not English language learners but are in the dual programming, would qualify for a little bit of funding. And it's, again, it's not significant, but it is a new allotment. There had been a lot of talk throughout the session about putting some performance-based funding into the formulas. At the end, there was only one small performance-based item included, and that is around CCMR. And so the rules for how that will be applied, again, have yet to be determined, but there will be a little bit of money associated with that. There's an optional extended year program that would allow districts to extend the school year for up to 30 days, have a summer school program for students in grades pre-K through 5, and they would provide half of our typical funding based on average daily attendance. And then, again, a small teacher incentive allotment, which is targeted to districts, rural districts and campuses with high needs, and that would be defined as those that have high concentrations of poverty. And you see the bullet there, it says in the law that the commissioner will set the rules on that. So beyond just funding matters and matters around tax rates and tax elections, there are some other requirements in the bill, including some that boards must approve some specific annual goals for each of the next 5 years to reach quantifiable goals for each campus in the areas of reading and math and also CCMR. And so we'll be working on that requirement and certainly be back with the board to talk about what those need to look like in the coming months. Students will be required to complete a FAFSA as part of their graduation requirements. And then the commissioner is now required to contract for a study to determine whether STAR tests are written at appropriate grade levels and the content of those tests are aligned to the appropriate grade level TEKS. There's also a little bit of new funding in here for reimbursing districts for college prep assessments and certification exams. So that was a good thing. So with all these changes, according to the state's own estimates, this bill should now shift things such that the state is paying for 45% of the M&O cost of our budgets, and districts would be paying 55% of those of the M&O portion of our budgets. And you can see that would reverse the downward trend that we've been on for the last 10 years. One of the other significant bills that passed in the last few days of the session was around TRS. This is Senate Bill 12, and it increases contributions to TRS by individuals, by school districts, and by the state over a 6-year period to help ensure that the TRS system remains sound. It also provides money for a 13th check, meaning a one-time payment to current retirees, and those amounts would be either the lesser of their current monthly payment or annuity from TRS or $2,000. And the bill says that TRS is required to make those payments by September of 2020, so at the end of this next business year, fiscal year for TRS. We've done a lot of work on TRS Active Care in this session, and as we've reported before, this was one of the bills that we testified on. The committee chair asked us to work directly with TRS on this. We've had one meeting, and I applaud Mr. Kale certainly for his extensive work in this area. We are still talking with TRS to define the framework around how we move forward. But in our meeting with them, there has been agreement from TRS that they would work with us in developing an alternative plan for our employees. So that's the TRS leadership had to get through the end of the session themselves, and so they had asked that we hold those conversations until after the session ended, and so we are having those discussions now on how that work will move forward. And then one final bill that passed towards the end of the session is one that changed quite a bit on its journey. It's Senate Bill 30, and it has to do with bond propositions. When this bill was first filed by Brian Birdwell, who is a senator, has a very, very small portion of our school district, the bill had nothing in it about propositions, about how you separate and present items on the ballot. It strictly had to do with the language of the propositions. After this bill came out of committee, there had been some amendments that now require that districts split out certain items on a ballot for a bond election. And that did pass. And actually, this bill went to a conference committee. But what finally passed was a requirement that new construction, not renovations, but new construction of a stadium or a natatorium or a performing arts center or recreational facilities other than playgrounds and gyms, teacher housing, or technology be in separate propositions on a bond ballot. So that's something that will be new for all school districts. Is a requirement. And then there are certain things that you have to include in the ballot language, including total principal and then total taxes that would be sufficient to pay for principal and interest. So again, the legislature adjourned May 27th. Certainly I think we saw that the vast majority of bills that were filed did not pass. Those of us who have worked through these sessions over a period of time see that many bills that don't pass, and quite frankly some of them that are not necessarily good bills, don't pass, they come back session after session. And so there are certain things that we fully expect that we will see again in the next session. There's a lot of work taking place right now among a number of different organizations to try to interpret the legislation, especially House Bill 3, and to begin to educate constituents. Texas School Alliance is one. They have a briefing next week that we are attending. Mr. Drollinger and I are sitting in on one tomorrow. That's a webinar the Texas Association of School Business Officials is hosting. Other entities, including our attorneys, the Eichelbaum Law Firm, are developing interpretations and summaries of information to share with clients. Also, Raise Your Hand Texas has put out information. TASB will be as well. I think you all are attending summer leadership next week. I'm sure you will hear briefings on legislature next week. So we will all be deep in the business of trying to understand the implications and the changes that were brought forth by House Bill 3. So the work is definitely not over. And so, again, I commend the board for all of your work and your commitment to, because it does make a difference. If you don't ever say anything, you don't take a position and make your concerns known or your preferences known, then certainly you will just have to adjust accordingly to what happens and have no opportunity at all to influence the outcome. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. This is a discussion item. Are there any of my colleagues that have questions? Dr. Reich?
There we go. Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you, President Mays. Ms. Powell, I appreciate the information and all of the tremendous work that you're having to go through right now to try to make sense of what all this does for our budget over the next few weeks. It's quite an undertaking for sure. Just a couple of questions. On the changes to allotments with the census blocking that the commissioner is going to have to do. So two things there. One, is that something that they're doing on their own, or is there opportunity for input from the districts into that process at all?
So in terms of the census blocks themselves, I believe school districts will start attaching the census block to the address, or we've heard that both ways. So I think, yes, school districts will get to a point where in our PEEM submissions, I believe, we will be attaching a census block to student addresses. Okay. In terms of the rules of where the commissioner sets those cut points, I honestly don't know that will be something that districts will have input on. It may. One change of note about that, the entire state comp allotment, is it has been directed towards students who are at risk. Now then, it will also, you also have flexibility to spend that on students who are economically disadvantaged. So that opens up a wide range of students that have not really been eligible for that funding before. In terms of the rules around what eligible expenditures are, I think that is a place where school districts might have some opportunity for input as the rules are being established.
What's the timetable, you think, for the commissioner?
That I don't know. It literally will be many months before all this is completely fleshed out. So we've heard no timetable on that sort of thing. So
we'll have, as far as formula impact, budget impact, we'll probably end up having some type of an amendment or two.
We very well may. For the moment, the recommendations that are being given to school districts is that unless you've got real good solid data for census, I mean, even if you know what the census blocks are, we don't know where the commissioner will set those cut points for those different funding weights. Right. And so districts are being encouraged, just take your free and reduced count and put it in that lowest weighted bucket for the moment. And then as we get better information on where those cut points are, and we get the data itself on the number of our students who live by census block and how they fall in those different buckets, then we can consider an amendment.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. The other question I have related to that is how cumbersome is this process to go through to define the census blocks and the students and the addresses and the reporting of that? And what I'm getting at essentially is that is it essentially an unfunded mandate, or is there some dollars equated to help us with this data?
Well, there's no
analysis?
Dollars that are specifically allocated to us to do this additional reporting. Federal government obviously has census block information, and so districts will be able to access that information. And as we begin enrolling kids, then we will just begin, just like we do any other record that's in their registration, wherever their address is, we'll probably have a database, I assume, that attaches it to a census block. I don't know exactly how that will work yet.
Yeah. Have fun, Mr. Branham. The other question I have on the early education allotment, the dollars that are there that pretty much cover what we were estimating would be for pre-K. Is that the entire early education allotment, or is there still dollars potentially left over for us to have some of these allowable uses with pumping more into reading and math for pre-K through 5, et cetera?
It will take most of that allotment to cover the cost of full-day pre-K.
Okay. Appreciate that. I think I had one Other question, yeah, on the SB 30, the ballot language on the taxes for the principal and the interest, is that specific to these that are separated out, or that's for all bond?
I think that will be for all bond propositions.
Okay. And so we'll have to have language indicating what those implications are if we break it out. If we keep it together, just one. If we break it out into 5 different pieces, we're going to have that for each of those.
Yes, and I believe that previously we've had to include that in the proposition that the board approves, but it didn't have to go on the ballot. And
right.
so, you know, part of the concern there is how do you project the interest rates, what interest rates may be when you sell bonds, and what your tax base may be. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. Mr. Wilbanks?
Thank you, Ms. Mays. Ms. Powell, I'll second what my colleague, Mr. Reich, said about thanks for all the work. I know you've got a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of unanswered questions going forward, and so it's going to be a fun summer. I have a few questions here, and for those listening at home that are just riveted by Texas school finance and its intricacies, could you explain, like, so our compression went from $1.04 to 97 cents, and so you mentioned that we're going to have an increase of 8 golden pennies that are available to us if we choose to use them in the future, but their yield has decreased. So is it true that the 8 copper pennies will be on our 90, not every district is being compressed to the same amount, but where do those copper pennies start and end? I guess for us, they would end at $1.05, 8 pennies.
Right, so, yeah, so today, the tier 1 rate, our tier 1 rate will now be 93 cents. And so then there are 8 cents then that are, so that'd be $1.01. From 93 cents to $1.01 would be those golden pennies. And then above that are the, what did I say, that was now 8 pennies, I think, that will be available as copper pennies above that.
Okay, so 9 above that. And so when you said the yield's reduced, do we know, I mean, how does
yes, and I'm sorry, I did not write that down, and I don't know if you can, well,
sorry, Tom.
We can bring that back, but yeah, so they reduce the yield. I think it's 80% of what a penny of will generate, or well, we better bring that one back to you.
No problem. I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunity to discuss that later. So on the GT allotment, which was eliminated and moved into the basic allotment, they are mandating that we certify our GT programs. And I know it's early and none of the roles have been made, but do we have any idea of what's going to be required of us to certify?
No. Absolutely nothing at this point. So.
Okay. And on the census tracts, have we done any demographic data on our, knowing that this was kind of coming? Do we have a good handle on what those census tracts that are going to be eligible and where our student population overlays on those?
So it's not census blocks that are eligible. Any student who is eligible for free or reduced is eligible for this funding, and then the extent of your funding depends on your census block.
So it's still based on...
It is. And so we have, we worked with our demographer early on this spring, and we sent them a file with our student addresses and had them try to attach census blocks to them. They had a lot that they weren't able to match initially. And that's something that they are working on now because they, with other school districts besides just us. And so that was something that we've heard also consistently from other large districts in the school alliance, where they try to go directly to U.S. government website and upload their student addresses to attach census blocks to them. And they were getting a lot of errors as well. Some of that has to do with the way an address is entered in the system, in our system. So if a student registers and an address is not typed in correctly, it may, whether it's a spelling error or what have you, then it may not match with a record that already exists in the U.S. Census data. And so there's some cleanup that we will probably all have to do with our student addresses before we can completely get everything matched up.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a fun process. And I think that's it. The only other question I have, and again, it's way too early to tell. I just don't know if you've gotten any word from any of our consultants or advisors, but the requirements for setting the goals for reading and math and CCMR, are we going to get any idea if we're going to get a mulligan this year, or we're going to have to have it done by over the summer or into next year?
Well, keep in mind, House Bill 3 technically takes effect September 1. So to your question about do we have to set goals over the course of the summer, no, I don't anticipate that. But you're right, no rules have been set yet. We have no idea what that will look like. I fully expect that there's a keen sense that it's going to take school districts some time to implement all of this. And so I don't expect that there's any thought that school districts are going to have those kinds of things adopted and in place just very shortly after September 1. I think there will be some latitude there.
Thanks. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Ms. Walton?
Thank you, President Mays. As others, I commend you, Cindy Powell, for all your efforts above and beyond what you have done. This legislative session has been remarkable. I want to thank and commend all of my fellow board members for all of the efforts that they put in on letters, visits to Austin, visits, telephone calls with our legislators, and so much more that each one of these people did. And also commend some of our state legislatures from this area for their good communications with you and with some of the rest of us on what was going to happen and how it would affect Arlington. I think many of them had their finger on that pulse, especially Chris Turner, who not only saw what needed to happen, but put forth these two very important pieces of legislation that were passed that you mentioned on page 4. So all in all, I really think that we did the best job we possibly could, and the outcome was just kind of, I think, almost up to chance in some cases. I did have a couple of questions. The copper penny thing, I'll never understand that. I don't know. So you're indicating at this point that a TRE will not be needed for for the future.
2019, right, and we'll get into that more even in the budget presentation next, but we do not see that we need to have a TRE this year. If a district's rollback tax rate after the new bill is over $1.04, you can't do it. Ours is not over $1.04. There are some school districts who still have that as an option even this year, but and we're one of those. But at this point, we are not seeing the need to do that this year.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood that. Thank you. On the changes to the allotment for example, GT or high school allotments, or that list that's on page 7, will our budget reflect increases in any of those, decreases, or will those amounts stay pretty much constant with what we've had in the past?
I think it certainly for this year they will stay the same, and okay. part of our accounting for all of our expenditures, all of our expenditures have to be coded based on codes that TEA gives us. And one of those elements is a program intent code, okay? There's a program intent code for career tech program. There's a program intent code for bilingual. There's a program intent code for special ed. There's a program intent code for gifted and talented programming. And so, part of, again, back to the rulemaking, I don't know if TEA will require districts to continue reporting expenditures with a program intent code for gifted and talented since the allotment itself went away, but still knowing that we have to file a report with the commissioner stating that we have a gifted and talented program. I kind of doubt that they'll make us track that. Our budgets have already been built with expenditures coded specifically to those programs. I don't anticipate that we're going to change our programming, and so the same programming will be in place. I think it's more a question about how the expenses get coded. Do we have to code them to that code that TEA tells us to use today for gifted and talented, or does that just become the code, a regular ed code?
Boggles my mind.
Ours too.
On the salaries issue, so supposedly now the state will be paying 45% of everything that it costs us to run the district. Question mark, question mark. And of course, salaries count in that basic allotment. So I don't even know what my question really is.
Well, and if I could insert even there a little clarity on what those percentages represent. So again, within the foundation school program, it uses a combination of state aid and property taxes to determine what a district's entitlement is. And really the entitlement itself is based on students and attendance, programs that they're in, your property values. And then and those things are all used in various ways to determine your entitlement. And then you're responsible for using a portion of your property taxes to pay for a share of that entitlement. It's that split that is what we are talking about when we say that the state will pay 45% and school districts will pay the other 55%. It's within those funding formulas. It's not based on our expenditures, on our actual expenditures. It's based on the foundation school program entitlements.
Okay.
And what portion of that belongs to the state and what portion districts are responsible.
So if we have to go into the fund balance, that skews everything.
I'm sorry?
It would change those percentages if we, for example, had to go into our fund balance to fund our budget.
Well, again, when they talk about those percentages, it's really only talking about the revenue side of things. It's kind of a separate discussion from, really looking at how much state aid you get as a percentage of your total expenditures.
Okay. Thank you for that schooling. On the Senate Bill 12 TRS, in 2019-2020, the rates go up. What are they currently?
They are currently for individuals, I think they are 7.7%. I think they are the percentages you see here for 1920.
Okay.
Those are current percentages, but slowly over time they're going to
go up. So this is not going to cost the district anything in 1920. So we won't have to look at that until later. Right. Okay. And I know this is a shot in the dark, but I'm still going to ask, on our TRS active care, looking in your crystal ball, when do you think our employees will possibly see some results of this lowering their health insurance premiums.
So our expectation is that the TRS work with us throughout this upcoming fall period into early spring, so that a plan could potentially be in place for enrollment of our employees next year. So hopefully for a plan year that begins September 1 of 2020. Now that remains to be seen, but that's certainly our expectation.
I think that's worthy. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Mr. Chapa?
Thank you, President Mays. Ms. Powell, I have several questions I have outlined here, and given the tenor of the conversation we've had so far, I imagine the answer to many of my questions are going to be we just
don't know
yet. But I'm going to ask them anyway. And I'm going to start with the House Bill 3906, Academic Accountability. And it says time limits on tests. Are they talking about, is this going to be an actual time limit that students will have to operate under in order to complete their test?
And it's, the tests can't take longer than a certain amount of time, and they're looking at breaking them up potentially even over maybe more than one day, I think, even on the end of course exams. That, in terms of specifics, you're right, I can't give you much detail on that, but
Okay, I was just
the
curious.
intent was to try to shorten them. I think.
Right. If I was just worried, maybe if there's a student that needs extra time on the test, or is it going to be sort of like an arbitrary cutoff, and then we're held accountable for students who could have completed the test and done quite well, but they're
Yeah,
just a
I
little slow.
think our understanding, and Dr. Wirtz behind you is nodding his head, is that students will still have a similar amount of time today as they do today to complete tests, but the intent is to try to shorten the test itself, I believe.
Okay. My next question is on House Bill 3 on the efficiency audit requirement before holding a TRE, and I know this is not something that we're maybe looking at doing now this year given the changes that have occurred, but I served on audit committee for a year, and we do all sorts of audit, and I know that you and your staff are always looking for efficiencies for us to achieve, and there's many that are going to be mentioned, I think, in your budget presentation, but I've never heard of an actual efficiency audit. Is there any substance to that term at this point, or is this sort of a efficiency audit? That sounds like a good thing, and so we put it in the bill.
So again, I'm not sure I can fully answer the question. The way this started was that you would have to pick a firm that the state had identified, and then I think the state would give some specific guidelines over what was to be included in the audit and how that audit, what they were supposed to be evaluating and to make their report. Over time, as it evolved, and what finally passed was you can choose your own auditor. You can even use your own independent auditor to do this efficiency audit. So there are cost containment studies, and we in this district had one of those some years ago. That's not what this is. I think it is probably, my guess is they will probably look at some qualitative data and student performance data and track that back to cost per student and compare you to peer districts on cost per student and other things to see if they identify, if they can affirm that a district is not spending disproportionately in one particular area compared to peers, and that your expenditures are appropriate given your student performance. So I don't know that I can fully answer that at this point either.
But this isn't something that we could call up a major auditing firm today and say, hey, we want an efficiency audit, and they'd be like, we know exactly what you want. I don't think that. Yeah, so the commissioner will be setting the rules on that, and even Mr. Edwards, I see back here, is shaking his head. So I think today in our independent audits, and for the single audit work that goes into our annual independent audit, just for grants, TEA prescribes some things that the auditor has to look at. So my presumption is they will do a similar kind of thing
for these efficiency audits. I think the expectation will be that that the output look very similar district to district. Just like today, there's prescribed formats for our audit reports. I would imagine there's some consistent kind of reporting that they'll be looking for, so that you could look at an efficiency audit for 3 different districts and you're going to see things that are very similar in terms of the layout and the particular items that have been evaluated, would be my guess.
Okay. On House Bill 3 also, the next slide was on compensation, and was the use of the word compensation sort of intentional in that
Yes.
the 75-25 could be used for things other than actual salary?
Yes.
And so would, for example, the healthcare subsidy be something that money could be used for?
Yes.
Okay. Also on House Bill 3, you've answered several questions on the changes to the state comp ed formulas. On the educational attainment single-parent family data that the commissioner is going to be using as part of this process, is that going to come from census data?
I believe it will. I think it will, but again, I don't know that for certain.
So has there been, and this is real early, but has there been any talk of mitigating the effect of districts that might have particular census blocks where there is not as many people who fill out the census as other places?
That has been a concern expressed. There also are concerns around rural districts where there are no census blocks, and how that funding will be distributed. And so I have not heard officially what the commissioner may do to try to recognize the first item you mentioned, which is there may be particular areas where within a census block individuals choose not to complete a census.
And I hope they do that, because that, there's many things in here that this is in some way, the mantra is let's tie it back to accountability, let's hold districts accountable. And in some ways, this is an aspect that we can't control, whether or not a family or an individual completes a census form. So I hope that that's something that the commissioner does look at. Something else that jumped out to me about the same thing is that a good chunk of this is going to be based on free and reduced meal enrollment. And I know something that our Student Health Advisory Committee is looking at right now is what would the effect be if the district moved from, I know at several campuses we currently provide universal free breakfast, but if we provide universal feeding, for lunch as well, which would, in my mind, eliminate the need for students to complete a free and reduced meal program application. So it's probably still too early, but what would the effect of us making that move for some campuses be for this aspect? Because it would probably be the same campuses that would have a high percentage of free and reduced meal enrollment.
There's a couple of things there. I have seen language, and I don't know that it's in the bill. I think it was, though, an acknowledgement that the commissioner would also determine how to make adjustments for districts that are on CEP, the Community Eligibility Program, which is the one you're referring to,
okay.
Where students at particular campuses eat free, and they don't even have to fill out a free reduced form because that eligibility is determined and that funding is determined based on the state certification. So for students that are already, for example, in a CHIP program or a TANF program, we get an electronic file identifying who those kids are. And so those kids don't have to fill out a form today. But others, if you're not on one of those state programs, you do have to fill out a form. So there is also discussion about districts can create their own form. You can use it to gather income information to help for other purposes if you have a campus that's on CEP, such as your funding for state comp today, or maybe some other program, whether it's federal or state, that is based on income. And so some districts are already gathering that through a local form that uses basically the same thresholds for determining poverty, but it's not a USDA form.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all things that the commissioner's going to have to consider. Is he going to provide any sort of adjustment to that distribution for those districts that are on CEP? Or will it still be strictly up to a local district to go get that information for purposes of just getting your state comp funding when you actually don't need income information to generate your free reduced status anymore? So all that is still stuff that has to be fleshed out.
Okay, no, thank you for that response. I had a similar question on House Bill 3 on the students are required to complete a FAFSA now. Is there any thought process about students who aren't eligible to complete a FAFSA? Has that been brought up at all?
I don't know the answer.
Okay. And finally on Senate Bill 30, it says ballot language must include a single specific purpose of the debt obligation. What does the single specific purpose requirement mean?
That would be a somewhat generic description, I think, of, but it can't be vague. It's going to have to be something, and I'm just going to make something up here. If you are doing renovations and improvements to facilities and all that's in one proposition, I think you would use some term like that, which is similar to what we use today. I think the thing that's really newer in terms of ballot language is having to include the taxes that it will take to pay off all the debt and including your total current debt.
Okay.
So again, that's rulemaking. And you know, so I think that as long as a proposition is around very generally renovation work, whether it takes, no matter what form it takes, I think you can put all that in a single description. I don't know, honestly, if that means that if you're going to buy school buses, does that mean that that now has to be in a separate proposition? It's not one that's called out that way.
Okay. Well, thank you for your detailed responses. I wanted to just close with a few comments and build off of what Ms. Walton said. And this was my first time to go through the legislative process, and it was very fast, it was very furious, and I want to commend the board for how we handled that process, and especially Ms. Walton and Mr. Hogg's help with being on the legislative calls every Friday morning, going through the bills, especially you and your staff, Cindy, responding to changes in legislation and getting us draft letters that we could look at to see, you know, what was going on and what would we say about that. And I think that this district is a little bit unique in the role and how active we are with things happening in Austin. And I think as Dr. Reich mentioned earlier and we've mentioned before, I think that gives us a pretty good place at the table for some of these changes happening. Doesn't mean that we control things, doesn't mean we get everything we wanted. Obviously what we were trying to accomplish with TRS Active Care this year specifically didn't work out, but I think it led to some important conversations and including I think a concession from a legislator who'll remain nameless that if they let us out, then everybody else out would want out too, which I think is sort of an indictment of the TRS Active Care system. But I think that we are doing great work representing our constituents and teachers and students in this district as much as we can from this role for them in Austin. And so again, congratulations and commend the board and Ms. Powell, your staff for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chapa. Mr. Hogg?
Thank you, President Mays. And Ms. Powell, I'll be fast. And first off, thank you for that. The good thing about this is the session's over.
Absolutely.
That blank picture of the Texas House is the greatest picture you can see when they're not down there lobbying and legislating. Those who don't know, this system was set up so that bills are not passed. Unfortunately, bills are passed sometimes with that. Ms. Powell, I'm going to ask a couple just real fast questions, make this really quick, because I know what the theme is of we don't know. And unfortunately, I think some of the legislators don't know yet either when they vote for bills, which is a scary part of this. So I just want to make a couple of comments. You know, in the first time in my 11 years, it's the first time we were really on the offensive this entire session instead of just a strictly defensive mode of a lot of having to kill things constantly all the time. And I say that for, we've been offensive before, but this was very like, okay, now where's the allocation go? A lot of people make the comment, oh, you guys really won this legislative session. And there's some good bills that were passed. I think HB 3 has some potential. There's some things that were passed, 3007, HB
3007 that we helped to get passed. I think it's a critical factor for something, but I have to tell you, and we'll talk about this more as we review, our loss on TRS active care makes me feel like we lost because it's such a dire needs for our teachers and our staff. And I know I'm probably harder on myself than anyone else on that because I think that is a top priority for us because I hear about it from all of our staff. I hear about it from our security guards who don't have insurance for those type of things. I appreciate staff being optimistic on what TRS active care is going to do. I try to consider myself an optimistic person, not on this one. Just a note for that. Let me ask, yeah, I've been jaded on them, and I'm probably still jaded on them right now. Let me ask this question, Ms. Powell, and this is the one on HB 3007 that we worked with Representative Turner to get passed, which is a great bill. We're glad we pushed this out because it was showing a blaring problem the state had of not giving us the data. When the governor signs that in, are we immediately making that request to get that data, or when do we think that data will come?
We've already got data, and I'll let Dr. Cavazos.
It's kind of a long story. I'll make it short. So remember, part of our discussion was pressing for this both at TEA and
the higher
Turner.
Right.
And so our work through TEA has already yielded the release of some of the data prior to the preliminary accountability. So that's happening now. They released some of the data, the TSI and the AP data and things like that as a result of our work with TEA. This one will go into effect, and it'll affect the following year where we get the actual source data.
Okay.
So what we got now, which is very good, better than last, is the data from TEA before they publish anything. And that's helping because we're making some important corrections and things like that that they missed. Next year will be the source data, which is even more helpful.
Perfect. And this is for all districts around the state. We'll get that source data, correct?
That's correct. And even
but not every district has a Dr. Barlow
right
to figure out that source data, right, Dr. Barlow? Right. I see him looking at it.
Yeah, so even the work we did with TEA, where they're now releasing it now, was released to all this districts.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Barlow and Dr. Cavazos. I know how much time y'all spent on that. To answer Mr. Chapa's question, trust me, Mr. Chapa, there's lots of consultants that are creating efficiency studies right now. As someone who works for a consulting and outsourcing firm, nothing like when someone's creating something. And I think the legislature's always like, we should hire less consultants. Then they pass bills that require us to hire more consultants. Ms. Powell, the only thing I'd say, and to Ms. Walton as secretary and Dr. Cavazos and staff, I'd like us as a board to review HB 3906 after Dr. Wirtz and his team actually gets some evaluation from TEA about what those writings, how those writing short samples are going to be reviewed. I would say that's probably September, October-ish timeframe for a realistic, hopefully potential timeframe, because I would like the board to be very aware of that because 3906, Ms. Walton, the legislatures were very clear that this is theirs to reduce the high stress, reduce this giant writing test and make it many short sample tests. Well, let's see if that's really happening. And so I would like this board to be able to review that for a future time frame so that we can know exactly what is going on. Last thing, Ms. Powell, just a little worried over this whole legislative session, how much power the Education Commissioner is still giving. So I would ask us to constantly, Ms. Paul, you don't have to write this down, but we just need to make sure we're monitoring and maybe keeping a tally of what all the Education Commissioner is now given authority to be able to authorize on us, because it's kind of unprecedented for the whole state and also any other commissioners within the state. So that's all. Thank you for all your work, Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. Ms. Fowler.
Thank you, President Mays. Ms. Powell, thank you so much for all the work that you and your team have done throughout this legislative session, while also continuing your regular work that needed to be done every day also. So thank you so much for that. On page 8 on the House Bill 3 under new allotments, I had a question about the teacher incentive allotment. And I know that it says commissioner will set the rules, but it's for the high needs campuses. Does that mean that any teacher that is on a high needs campus will get an increase, or is this somehow going to be tied to performance?
And I can't answer that. That may actually be something that's somewhat spelled out, and I didn't capture it. I can't imagine that it would just be if you are just present on the campus, I imagine there's some criteria that will be attached to that.
All right, so you think some follow-up will come on that?
I think that, we can follow back up once the commissioner sets the rules and there's more clarity around what it is. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Ms. Val. Are there any other questions? Those are some very good questions. Once again, Ms. Powell, thank you very much for this legislative update. I'll just repeat what my colleagues have said, and that is thank you. Definitely not patronizing. We saw the hard work. We passed y'all up on 35. We got off elevators. There y'all were in the Capitol. Y'all have worked very, very, very hard, and we truly do appreciate it. And as Ms. Fowler said, in addition to the amazing job that you do for the district as well. Also, thanks to my colleagues, thank to the governance committee, thank you, Mr. Hogg, for chairing. Once again, we did it because we feel it's important to advocate for our students and for our teachers, and I'm very humble of the voice that I believe came out of AISD, and as Mr. Chapa said, even if things didn't go exactly as we were anticipating at the beginning, we've started conversations, and I think the biggest thing we can do is make sure those conversations continue. Next on our agenda is our discussion item B. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays, and Ms. Powell was just stay right where you are, I guess. And so we're going to move into not only the effects of all that has happened, but now how it affects our budget. And I think the theme is going to kind of recur in the sense that some of these main pieces are still unknown, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about. But this gives us a good look at our preliminary budget. So, Ms. Powell.
Thank you. And again, President Mays, board members, Dr. Cavazos, when we were looking at the agenda for tonight and where to place things, we had a very deliberate discussion about putting the legislative update prior to this. Usually throughout the session, legislative update is the very last thing we do on our discussion agendas. But as you will see as we move through, HB3 has a tremendous effect on our budget, and so kind of having that understanding before we get into it is helpful. Each year when I come here and we stand here to make this first presentation, I start by saying thank you, and it's the thank you to everyone involved in this. There are hundreds of people that have put in work towards this budget. It starts at the campus level with teachers telling their principals what they need, what they want, principals working with their site-based teams, the campus secretaries doing the data entry, and then also in departments, the department heads in their meetings, their team meetings with senior leadership, in their own secretaries, inputting the data. There's just a tremendous effort to even get things into the system and submitted for review. And so I commend everybody for that, because as somebody said, all this always comes on top of, other daily assignments. I particularly, though, want to thank the HR department. They do tremendous work in staffing, and the personnel piece of our budget is 88% of our budget, and so I always say you've got to get that right. You can get almost get everything else wrong, but you've got to get that piece right with your budget, and so they do really good work with that, and especially I thank Mark Strand, Scott Kale for their work in that area. The senior administrative team and I'm going to show you, I'm going to call it out when we get there very specifically, but you're going to see that that they have made a very significant effort this year to be careful in what they've asked for, prioritize their needs, and they understand, that we have a budget deficit and that we needed to find deficiencies within individual departments, and you're going to see that that is the case. So I appreciate their partnership, especially Dr. Wirtz and his group, in all the thinking that they have brought to the table regarding budget. Most especially, though, I have to thank the Brain Trust over here, my staff, Tony Drollinger, Mandy Mew, Stephanie Dalla, directly on budget, Kelly Horn, David Lewis, probably more than any year ever in us working on this. I particularly appreciate their talents, their expertise, and most importantly, their sense of humor. We have laughed some as we've gone through this, and you have to, you know, and we probably will continue to laugh a few more weeks, but we spent a lot of quality time together recently on this, but truly, this is a remarkable team, very talented, very dedicated, and I sincerely appreciate that commitment and their talents towards this. So I just get to tell the story here. So tonight, we're going to talk about the preliminary budget for the general fund. And you have a notebook, and in your notebook, there's several things. There's the legislative update that we just gave that has information in there about House Bill 3. There's the presentation we're going to go through now on the preliminary budget. And then there is a tax rate, proposed tax rate presentation, very brief, that'll follow this. But behind that is the budget packet itself. And so what we're going to look at here on these slides is very summarized. And then if you want to see more detail, please go back to this budget packet. There are explanations in there for specific line items. The explanations begin on page 18 and go through each line of our expenditure budget and explain how it's different than last year. And so there's some good information in there. There's also some charts in there, and there's a little narrative up front that's more around the revenue side, but that's in your packet as well. So again, what we're going to see tonight is very, very summarized. But we're going to talk about the timeline as we move through the month of June. This is a little different because of House Bill 3 and the amount of interpretation and work still to be done around that. So we'll talk about our current year budget projections. That is always helpful to help set up where we're headed in the next year. We'll talk about our estimates for enrollment and property values. I will give some highlights of what is in the budget at this point, and we'll talk about the things that are still to come, some additional considerations. So with that, in terms of our budget timeline, tonight, again, we're going to look at the general fund. Next week, we'll continue some discussion on the general fund budget. We'll also bring forward for the first time budgets on the other funds, the food service fund, the debt service fund, the natural gas fund, the capital projects funds. All of those are funds that we also adopt budgets for. Those will come to you next week. Next week, we hope to start talking more specifically about compensation. You've heard some information. You'll hear a little more detail in just a few minutes about that and some mandates around that. And then we plan to hold the public hearing that we are required to hold before the board adopts a budget on June 18th. That is also the night that right now we are planning to be at a point where the board can consider acting on the budget. So this will be maybe a little more fluid than it has in other years because of the impact of House Bill 3, but I think we can still get to a point where by June 18th, I think we can vote on the budget. If not, we have to adopt the budget by June 30th. That's law. So we'll get there for certain. We will not adopt a tax rate in the month of June. Tonight we're going to ask you to adopt or to approve the proposed rate that we have to put in this notice that is published about that hearing. We won't actually adopt the tax rate until August, after we get certified values, and so that'll be the last step of the process. So with that, in terms of the general fund, what I want to call out here is we first want to start by looking at the 2018-2019 year, our current year, where we started the year and where we think we're going to wind up, because that's always telling for us as we begin to look forward and build the next year's budget. We adopted a budget for the 18-19 year that had a $38.7 million deficit in it. Today, we are projecting that we will actually end the year, June 30th, with a deficit just under $3 million. So that's a variance, a positive variance of $35 million. That's for various reasons, and we call them out over here on the right-hand side. For starters, our certified property values last year were higher than what we used when we put the budget together. We knew that as soon as we got our certified values. We shared that with the board, but that impacted us by $7 million. Interest rates have been up throughout the year, so our investment earnings have been much higher than we projected. Then also our state aid was higher than we projected. That one was a little surprising to us, to be real honest, and it was more around that piece, that local share piece, and the fact that what was certified for our local share by the comptroller was less than we had anticipated, which meant we got more state aid. And that's largely why that one is up. We also received a settlement payment from a previous year, a settlement from the state as a result of a property value audit. We request audits through the comptroller's office each year, again, because if our values are lowered, even through potentially an audit process, it will generate more state aid. So we received a prior settlement there from a value audit. And then we received a one-time payment on SHARS Medicaid, or Medicaid SHARS program that we participate in. The State Department of Health and Human Services processes SHARS claims for school districts. They typically, every year, they have a settlement at the end of the year, a settle-up payment on our SHARS claims. They were running way behind, and they were actually 2 years behind in their payments. And so they hired extra staff, and they caught up by 1 year. And they will always be 1 year behind just because of the way the reporting works. But they were really 2 years behind. They made gains this year, and they made an extra settle-up payment to all districts this year. Now then, they're kind of back in their normal schedule. And so that's money that we did not expect to have this particular year. On the expenditure side, there are several things. Two, the biggest things made a difference. Our vacancy patterns in filling positions was different than we had anticipated. And then also of significant note in utilities, we again recognized the benefit of some very aggressive energy conservation efforts, energy management efforts there, and a mild winter. So that was very helpful last year. So all of that together yielded an operating deficit of just under $3 million. So again, much better than we budgeted. After the year got started, the board approved an amendment to use some surplus fund balance to pay for the renovations of a facility for the new early college high school program, also architectural design work on the junior high Fine Arts Dual Language Academy program at Gunn, and then some lesser funds for some work to eventually combine, not consolidate, but physically move some departments, more departments into the Enterprise Center to help us gain some operating efficiencies. So all those things were approved in budget amendments. So we spent another $10.5 million out of surplus fund balance. And that, though, is not, it's separate and apart from our operating revenues and expenditures, so we call it out separately. So all in all, when you factor in those one-time uses surplus fund balance, we wind up with a $13 million deficit, again, compared to the $38 million that we budgeted. So we finished in a very strong place, and we finished with a fund balance of $188 million, or that's where we were projecting to end this year. Last year, we actually ended the year with a $201 million fund balance. So as of our last audit date, you can see the breakdown here of our fund balance. The purple category, which is the big portion of the bar, is unassigned fund balance. Those are dollars that are available to us for any purpose. It was out of that money that we took the $10 million for those purposes we just talked about. So, you know, we always talk about our credit rating and the fact that credit rating agencies want to see that a school district has at least 2 months of operating expense and fund balance. We have well over 4 months of operating expense. So we have a very healthy fund balance, and we expect that to continue even into this year now. We're going to go through a little more detail on some subsequent slides, but I've got two here that just pretty much capture the key points that we will want to make in terms of property values. You're going to see on a chart in just a minute how those look, but our property values we anticipate are going to be up about 11.4% over last year. We got preliminary values May 15th from the Tarrant Appraisal District, and we have a long history of how the May 15th preliminary values change until they are finally certified July 25th. We use that historical information to project out what we think our certified values are going to be. Through that work, we've estimated that our certified values will be up about 11.4% over last year. I went back and looked. I've got spreadsheets that go back 30 years, and in 30 years, we've never had that big a jump in our values from one year to the next. That of all years to have this happen, it had to be in the year that TEA now is moving, or the state is moving from using prior year values in the funding formulas to current year values. And so that actually, you know, while it's great that we had the property value growth, it does have a negative impact in our state aid funding formulas. In terms of the tax rate, the maintenance and operations tax rate is the rate that we levy to pay for the day-to-day cost of operating the school district or funding the general fund. The constitutional limit is still $1.17, but districts will not be able to get there at this point under the House Bill 3 rules. Today, we tax at $1.04. And as we've already heard, under HB 3, we're going to have to lower our rate by 7 cents. And so our tax rate this next year will be 97 cents. And that's good for taxpayers. House Bill 3 then, in terms of state aid, makes what I keep using the term sweeping changes to all the state funding formulas. And so we make estimates of enrollment, property values, and tax collections. All those things also affect state aid. And so we factored those things into our state aid estimates, along with our understanding of the changes brought about by House Bill 3. And then we still, and I've got a slide that shows the chart with the arrow going up as our property values go up. It has the other arrow showing state aid coming down. That concept will continue to be the same going forward. It's just kind of reset everything with House Bill 3, but that continues to be something just to pay attention to. On the expenditure side, we use staffing formulas that the board approved back in, I think it was in January, and Mr. Kale and his team used that for staffing. We projected an enrollment of 59,423 students, which that's a slight decrease. It's a decrease of 497 from last year's actual PEIMS that was submitted. And our staffing formulas have yielded a net reduction of 50.5 teaching or total campus units this year, not just teachers, TAs, and other positions that are driven by formulas. So again, kudos to Mark Strand and Mr. Kale and their efforts to make sure that we're being efficient in our staffing efforts, because there are big dollars there, and we have to be mindful of our staffing always in order to help control our budget. In terms of our operating cost, our entire team creates budget requests around our strategic plan and our instructional priorities. You will see that there's money in here for new programs, including the Piercy STEM Academy, the Crow Leadership Academy, Wimbish World Language Academy, and then also the new early college high school program, Arlington College and Career High School program. We'll also here, as we always say with the preliminary budget, there's nothing built in here yet for salary increases. We know that there's a mandate in House Bill 3 for salary increases, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. We've already talked about our fund balance, that our fund balance is of the end of last fiscal year. Our last audit report on that fund balance is very strong, which is very helpful as we begin to develop a budget. So here you see a trend of our enrollment. One thing I will point out here is that you can see that we've been dropping well over 1,000 students each year for several years. We think that we're seeing that moderate. And so our projection for enrollment this year is actually it's 497, I think, students less than last year's official enrollment. This is where we begin to see the impact of our marketing efforts and our transfer policies and efforts. And so I think that we are beginning to see that trend change. In terms of property values, this chart shows a history of our property values, and you can see that the bar on the far right is our estimate of certified values for the 2019 year, and it is dramatically higher than the previous 10 years on this slide. And I had to go back. If I go back as far as I can't find a year where our values grew this much. Again, this has not changed. As our property values go up, our state aid will go down. That will continue forward. And then we have a great big caution is before we move any further, and that is around HB 3. HB 3 was passed by the legislature on May 25th. And so we've had it for just a tick over a week now. And not just us, but everybody in the state, and everyone has been scrambling trying to understand what's in there. The bill is 303 pages long, and so there's a lot of content there to process, and as we've said before, it will take TEA and the Comptroller's Office many months to fully analyze and incorporate changes to the funding formulas and set implementation rules and change the tax rate disclosure notices even that are required. So we look for every opportunity we have to ask questions of people and to read information about the bill and specific parts of the bill. And so what you're going to see here reflects our current understanding of the bill, and that very well may change in the next few weeks, and we will make adjustments accordingly. So this slide shows probably is at its very highest, most summarized level where our preliminary budget is right now. You can see the column second from the right is the 2019 preliminary budget column. Where we are today is projecting a deficit of $3.8 million for the 1920 year. That has nothing in it yet for raises. Again, we know we have a mandate from House Bill 3 around raises. There's also, should just be aware that House Bill 3 mandates full-day pre-K. Likewise, there's nothing here for full-day pre-K either, okay? So we'll have some more discussion on that in just a minute. So you can see, though, that where we are today is a budget deficit of $3.8 million. That will absolutely increase as we implement the raise and make other adjustments. One thing I want to point out here, and I said earlier I was going to call this out, if you look at the expenditure budget of $522 million, that is $8 million less than the original budget that was adopted for this current year. And that's significant with a district our size and the programming that we have in place. And so that's where I commend the senior administrative team for bringing forward reductions where we could to make sure that we're doing our part to identify efficiencies and minimize our budgeted deficit. I'll remind all of us that last fall, after we adopted the 18-19 budget, we made projections forward for the next 4 years. And our projection for the 19-20 year was that we would have a deficit of $49 million, almost $50 million. Again, that did not include raises. So the budget we actually adopted for 18-19 had a $38.7 million deficit. We were anticipating that because of the way the state funding system was growing, anticipated inflationary pressures, that we would wind up with a deficit maybe $49 million. And you can see what we're looking at today is $3.8 million. And again, that will get bigger as we add in raises and make any other final adjustments. But certainly we are in a much better place for next year than we anticipated last fall. So I won't tarry too much on these slides, but you can see here the breakdown between state aid and property taxes and the other funding sources. This does look a little bit different. If you're recalling that slide we looked at, it said that the state would start funding 45%. Again, that's across the state, all of their funding, and it's just the precise definition of what makes up that M&O revenue. There's some state dollars here that are outside of the foundation school program. So, and then on the property tax side, there's penalty and interest that is outside the foundation school program. So that's why these numbers look a little bit different than what you saw on that other slide when we talked about House Bill 3 in general. And then this is just a comparison of revenues this year and last year, and that the distribution, and it's still fairly similar at this point. On the expenditure side, this looks very familiar. Our payroll makes up 88% of our total budget, and you see the other areas following much smaller percentages. The purchased and contracted services category is where utilities are. And so utilities, if you look just at utilities and some other mandated or required contracted services such as the appraisal district and a few other things, that makes up almost 95% of our total budget. And so there's very little for other contracted services, supplies, materials, and other things that make up our budget. So that's when we talk about how important it is that we get our payroll budget right. That's why. When we look at our fund balance and how many months of operating expense that represents, the two bars on the far right are what we should look at here. We are projecting that we'll end the 18-19 year with 4.3 months worth of money in fund balance, of expenditures in fund balance. And then based on the preliminary budget, we're estimating that we would be about 4.2 months of operating expense next year. We always put our bond rating on here. You notice we have a TBD under the 2020 year. We get bond ratings as we are preparing to sell bonds. We've sold all the bonds that we have authorized today. And so we don't have any other bonds that we're planning to sell right now. So we will not be doing a credit rating review in the next few months. If we move forward with the plan for a bond election and if it were to pass, at the point soon after that we plan to sell the first round of bonds, we will get a new bond credit rating at that point. All right, so there's this slide we've kind of laughed at when we've seen it, but it helps demonstrate the impact of House Bill 3. And really what we're going to look at are the columns on the right-hand side of the black bar, and I'll take you down to the corner, the bottom right cell where you see $4.8 million. That's the net gain that we've calculated today between our property tax revenues and the state funding formulas using the House Bill 3 formulas. And again, I go back to that caution slide. This is based on our understanding of the funding formulas. we get a template. There's a gentleman who used to work for TEA, now he works for an investment banking firm, but he still provides the template, the Excel template that districts use to estimate their state aid. We have received a template, and he's actually, I think, provided one update. And so as we fill that out, that's where this information comes from. He says in his own templates, the notes section, that he's still trying to interpret all the impact of HB3, and he always says his interpretation is absolutely subject to change, I think is the way he always puts it. And so again, this very well may change, but $4.8 million is the net gain that we're showing right now. I've highlighted some things in yellow because it kind of helps to call out some of the places where you see the impact of House Bill 3. For example, the current year taxes. You see that number in the far right-hand column, that negative $20 million, that's the difference between the tax revenue that we expect to collect under House Bill 3 compared to what we would have collected next year if current law had remained in effect. And keep in mind, under House Bill 3, we have to lower our tax rate. So that's the primary reason for the difference between those two. If you are scrolling on down the page, you can see gifted and talented and the high school allotment completely go away. You see a dyslexia allotment and early education allotments there that are new. The local share, if we can go back, Frank, just a sec. There we go. The local share, you can see on the far right-hand side, $10 million. That's where we see the effect of moving from prior year property values to current year property values. Our portion of the state funding entitlement is $10 million more because we've moved to current year property values than it would have been had current law been in effect and we were still using prior year values, okay? And it's even more dramatic if you think about the fact that the tax rate that's used to calculate that is a lesser rate than we had used previously. So those are probably the most prominent things to point out. But again, $4.8 million net gain is what we're showing at the moment. And I would say that early on, literally the night before the two chambers voted on the final version of school finance, the Legislative Budget Board put out runs that showed the net gain for every district in the state. And that first set of runs showed $88 million is $28 million is what Arlington ISD would generate in funding in year one. And we looked at that and thought, wow, that's great, but didn't seem to sound quite reasonable. Within several days, we got runs from Pos.A and Associates, the preeminent school finance consulting firm in the state, and they showed 14 million, so already, a much lesser amount. When we've done our own gains, now you see that it's yielded $4.8 million. We are hearing other districts make similar or ask similar questions. Why is this different? One of the things that we've known is that because our property values shot up so dramatically this year, that's impacting the gain. The models that Legislative Budget Board ran and that even Pos.A and Associate ran did not have our updated property values because those have just come out too. Similarly, everybody again is still trying to understand and interpret the bills. So as we move forward, all of us collectively, all of the models will become tighter. They'll be more accurate, and so we hope to continue to see progress here. We may wind up with more than $4.8 million net gain. This is where we are today based on our current understanding. So back to raises, House Bill 3 mandate. We've already talked about the fact that the bill says that 30% of our Chapter 48 gain has to be spent to give compensation increases to employees other than administrators. And then 75% of that amount has to be spent on teachers, counselors, librarians, and nurses, and you have to differentiate pay for teachers, classroom teachers with more than 5 years experience. So the estimated gain under Chapter 48 for us is $25 million. And I'm going to go backwards. You see the green bar across the bottom, and go to the far right-hand side, the $4.8 million. The next line up from that is the $25 million. That's our total state aid. That's what they mean when they say the Chapter 48 gain. So 30% of that is $7.5 million. And so that's the sum of money that we are required to allocate across all employees other than administrators. Just to give you context, a 1% raise for all AISD employees would cost $3.8 million. So we've spent the last week really getting to the point you see here with the preliminary budget and our revenue estimates. We now are beginning to switch gears and start to really work in earnest on the salary piece. And so we don't have any salary information at all to share this evening. Again, we're still trying to interpret some of the rules around that and build models to bring to you. We hope to have some salary information to share next week, and like I said, that's what we're working on in earnest right now. So again, it's those rules, the definitions, defining all the elements of what's in HB3, and that's our work in the next few days. Another mandate, again, is around full-day pre-K. I mentioned earlier that full-day pre-K is mandated beginning with the 1920 year. There is a provision for waivers. Waivers will be granted if a district would have to construct facilities to accommodate kids on a full-day basis in pre-K, or if implementing full-day pre-K would mean that you would wind up serving fewer kids, and that's really more around not being able to get enough qualified, certified, properly certified teachers for pre-K. So a waiver, as we understand it, there's no discretion really there on the part of the commissioner. If you ask for a waiver, it will be granted. The waiver is good for 3 years. It can be extended for one more 3-year period. If you get a waiver, it doesn't mean that now then you can't or you're precluded from implementing full-day pre-K within 3 years. It just means that, if you had to have it, it would be good for up to 3 years. So one of the things that, our district has been planning towards has been an effort to move towards full-day pre-K. And as we've talked over the last year about our programming priorities, pre-K was one that rose absolutely to the top. And we had understood that to do that, we likely would need to have a TRE and to help fund that. And so we were already planning for the operational piece. How can we implement full-day pre-K in the coming years? We also knew that there were some capital investments required there. We need to not construct new facilities, but add bathrooms to classrooms and such as that to make sure, and in some places some building additions, but to make sure that we had enough classroom space for pre-K. And so we were already headed down this path anyway. Now it is mandated. And so our thinking at the moment is that we should be thoughtful and continue our very deliberate approach to implementing full-day pre-K. And so our recommendation is going to be that we look at implementing full-day pre-K at as many as maybe 5 elementary schools in this upcoming year, 5 schools where we identify that we've got the capacity to do that. And that will help us operationally prepare for a full transition to full-day pre-K. This will help us get a curriculum set, get the daily routines in place, plan for the staffing that's required, and again, more further plan for the capital work that will need to take place. So that we estimate would cost $887,000. That is not in the budget at the moment, but that's our recommendation that we come back and add that. and that we then ask for a waiver for the remaining locations. And then we can plan towards implementation for that following year. So then everybody needs to keep in mind, again, that when we do fully implement full-day pre-K, we're looking at least probably $8 million. And it depends, you know, we've had ranges in there, but anywhere really between 8 and 10 million. It's probably closer to 8 at the moment. So when we talk about having a deficit in next year's budget, that's before we implement that mandate of full-day pre-K. So in the following year, if we move to full-day pre-K, there's going to be an $8 million new expense come onto our books that's not there today. So that would certainly have an impact on our overall operating deficit. All right, and then just quickly some highlights that are in the budget. We have planned our budget around the strategic plan. We provided for new programming, the Crow Leadership Academy, Piercy STEM Academy, Wimbush World Language Academy, the new college and career high school. Corey and Jones are picking up their 4th grade cohort of students for next year. And so those things are all already in the budget. We've also included money to pay for AP exams and college assessments for students. And turns out House Bill 3, we may get some reimbursements for some of that. So that's good. In terms of interest income, that budget we've been able to increase by $2 million because rates are up and also because our cash balances that are available for investment are up. The Tax Increment Finance Zone, or TIF, this is something important to point out. We have been participating in a downtown Arlington TIF. It's an economic development zone. So throughout the last 20 years, the properties inside that TIF pay taxes at our current adopted rate, but we recognize that as revenue on our books. We separate out the taxes on the incremental value compared to the base year. The very first year that the TIF was put in place, you take a snapshot of those property values. From that point forward, the taxes on that growth get paid back to the TIF, and they use it to make other infrastructure improvements inside the TIF zone to promote more development. That TIF has now ended. It ended December of 18. So that has an impact on our budget. While the TIF is in place, we recognize the TIF revenue, and we have an equal expense where we send that money back to the TIF. Once the TIF expires, we keep the money on that new growth. And so this particular TIF has been very successful over the last 20 years. The property values have grown over $200 million, almost $207 million in the downtown Arlington area. And so those taxes now come back to us and stay with us. So that's part of our growth. Again, we've already talked about campus staffing. We staff to ratios that the board approves. Those campus staffing formulas yielded 50.5 net fewer positions for next year. We reduced our health and life insurance budget to track more closely with actual participation. Our budget last year was probably a little high compared to our actual participation. So this reduction gets the budget in line with our actual participation. Utilities, you'll see a big reduction there. We have executed and the board approved a new electricity supply contract that takes effect in January that has lower pricing. So we'll recognize some less expensive electricity supply for half the year, basically. So that is helpful. We also have made a number of improvements, and we'll be making more improvements this next year to irrigation systems and water consumption controls, and actually just the water meters themselves. So that will help us reduce our water budgets. On the contracted services, there's actually an increase there of about $800,000. That's for, in part, additional school resource officers. We added some resource officers, 3 of them, during the year, this past year, so those weren't part of the original budget last year. So those are part of the original budget this year. So that's part of the increase. Also, some professional development around READ 180 program, some contracted counseling service through UTA. So that again supports our social emotional services. And then STEM Connector and other school leadership contracts for leadership development. This particular page, and I apologize, we had a typo on here. We had made a change in the budget, and it made it into the PowerPoint, but not into the version of the presentation that went to the print shop. So you should have a separate page sitting at your place that shows this, the corrected version. What this simply shows, the top part above the orange line, shows that preliminary budget that we talked about a few minutes ago with a $3.8 million deficit. Again, knowing that there's nothing there yet for raises for full-day pre-K. What you see highlighted in orange there is if we add an amount for the that mandated raise that we talked about, and if we also, which is $7.5 million plus some change, and if we add in the cost to implement full-day pre-K at 5 campuses, part of that transition plan of $887,000, we'd add another $8.4 million here, knowing that that is still not all of the salary increase that we're going to need to address. That is just the mandate. And what this simply is intended to do is to demonstrate that our deficit, instead of being $3.8 million already at this point, would be $12.2 million. And so again, keeping in mind that you know, we still have raises to talk about beyond just that mandate. And also keeping in mind that as we move into even next year, and begin to fully implement full-day pre-K, there will be additional expense that come into our budget for that. So we'll continue to work on the salary portion of the budget, and we hope to have enough clarity that we can bring something solid to you all even next week. If we find that there's some real concern over the interpretation or how the models need to work, we might have to rethink that, but our plan is to bring something back next week on that. We are continuing to try to understand HB3 and what it does to us and for us, and make adjustments for anything new that we learn. We will talk more fully about full-day pre-K, and then we'll bring budgets on those other funds for next week. And so that's the same schedule we looked at just a moment ago. And so with that then, be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you again, Mrs. Powell. Once again, this is for discussion. Do I have any of my colleagues that have questions? Ms. Walton?
Thank you, President Mays. Page 4, key points, expenditures, staffing, the reduction of 50.5 staff members. Can you tell me how many of those are teachers?
I think, well, let's see here. The net in the back is got folks other than just teachers in there. So the professional staff, I can tell you, we can get you this close. On page 18 of the budget packet itself, which is behind the presentations, there are 39.5 fewer professional positions on our campuses. And so a portion of those are teachers. There may be a handful of other positions in there that are not teachers but are professional positions that are controlled by formulas, and that's a net reduction.
Okay, so that could, let me clarify, that could be nurses, counselors, librarians,
So nurses, you know, we have one.
Well, yeah, that's kind of set.
Librarians, same.
Counselors.
Counselors, yes, and in other professionals. Some of the, there may be a handful of positions funded, not teaching positions, but professionals funded, say, out of state comp money that are not there. But 39 and a half.
Yeah, like coaches,
professionals.
like academic coaches or something.
The instructional coaches are funded out of Title I money.
Okay.
Typically, so they're not here.
Can you give me an example of maybe a group that would be affected by this?
We can do that. We may have that in a minute. But if you look down below that, then the other 11 are paraprofessional positions. Those are primarily TAs and stuff.
Okay. Well, that'd be 50 and a half, yeah, okay, right. Oh, but yeah, you're getting me the breakdown, okay. There was one other question, it seems, that I had somewhere. On the full-day pre-K, if we have, well, we will, when we get a waiver, will we still get the full allotment from the state, or will that be cut back?
Yes, and that's a good question. The allotment is based on the kids who are in kindergarten through third grade who are either educationally disadvantaged, which translates to economically disadvantaged, or they are English language learners. So yes, those dollars will still come to us, but that's really where they intend for districts to pay for full-day pre-K.
Gotcha. And you clarify, you did say that, not in the budget yet, but there was an idea to implement all-day pre-K4 at 5 schools?
5 campuses, and we anticipate that would require 10 more teachers and 10 more TAs.
Yeah.
And then supplies and materials and professional development, and so all that comes to that $887,000.
Okay, thank you. That was all my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Mr. Hogg?
Yeah, thank you, President Mays, and Ms. Powell, thank you and your whole staff for this budget. This is not a monthly project. This is all year. I know y'all start right when we finish this budget, starting to work on our next year, so I truly appreciate it. And you guys always, the great thing is I don't always love the budget, but I can always come back with confidence that y'all put in the work and done your time on this. So Ms. Powell, I'm gonna keep this real short and simple tonight, as I know we're gonna have multiple discussions. I'd like to see, from a salary standpoint, right, as we start looking at this and evaluating this, let's be honest, our district, we value everyone in this district. As much as it's popular to say from legislators, you don't like administrators, we can see what happens, the impact of strong administrators in a building. So I'm not gonna beat around the bush and be like, oh, we're probably gonna acknowledge our administrators. We're gonna acknowledge our security guards. We're gonna acknowledge our TAs. We're gonna acknowledge the cafeteria workers, all the people that run this district. That keep this district running. So I'd like to see what we see as a total rewards compensation from that, and I was very specific on that word, total rewards. I want to see what our costs would be to add those others in and start seeing those calculations, but also on TRS, active care, what our costs are going to be, what we expect, because I don't think we can look at these things in silos. We have to look at them as a total rewards compensation, because that's what it is. It is maybe once, and I think most of our staff realizes that once you start seeing it all together, you'll start throwing a little more fight to our legislators over what happens on TRS active care, because it's nice if you have other options. Awesome. If you don't, whatever raise you're going to get is probably going to go away from a TRS active care increase. And so I'll definitely bring that up. Ms. Powell, I'd also, I'm not telling y'all to find it. I'd love to see that come back if y'all can find that 3.84 that we're in the deficit at right now, that we're listing as our deficit. It'd be nice to have that come back before raises and other things start coming in to show that, to think that. So just, I know y'all been working on it. Look, Dr. Foss is like, oh, what's he asking for? I am asking for it. I'm thinking of it, of what y'all could do, and I'm not saying show me exactly how, but I would ask the staff to review that and find that, and I'll also look through other pieces on there, and that's always really exciting for that. And Ms. Powell, the last thing I'd say, and Dr. Cavazos, knowing that we have future years obligations, all day pre-K, we need to see the years going out and what those obligations are going to come out and be, so that we're planning for future years going forward, because this is never a one-year budget. This is always a multi-year budget, because anything we do this year affects next year. So I'd like to make sure we're taking the full total couple of years into account, just as we start this budget process on our final review.
So let me comment on that piece there. We've had specific conversations around that. We don't have a way to project the revenue impact beyond this 1 year at the moment. There's no template out there. The complexity around what happens with the tax rate is very significant. I think we can kind of make an assumption on what the tax rate may be, but it's there's no template even in place to project beyond 1 year at the moment. Now that may be coming shortly. I think everybody's focused on, what do we got to do now to get budgets adopted, because majority of school districts have July 1 fiscal year start dates, and so everybody's scrambling trying to get a budget right now. So we will definitely work on that. I don't know that we can have that piece.
That's fine.
Even
and
next
Ms. Powell,
week.
even if it's just a little more ironed out, showing what we think future year expenditures
Yeah.
could be, I'm more interested in that than the projected revenue, just so we're accounting for that potential all-day pre-K and that expenditure that we have. I would be more concerned with that than that piece, so that we have those built in. And another thing I'd tell my colleagues on this, while the Texas House and the Texas Senate was very pro-public education, I think they're afraid of some elections coming up. I worry for what this is in future budget years, in future funding years. We have this for 2 years, so I think I think as a board we have to be cautious over where this money goes in for raises and salaries allocations, because the worst thing that happens is it comes and it's here for 2 years, and then 2 years from now it's having to be cut. And so how do we do that? Do you put it in certain things? Do you put it in stipends? Do you put it in different types of things? It's just a real reality. I've always never been a fan of one-time checks, things like that, and I don't think that'd meet HB 3's standards, but I think those are the ways we have to start thinking about this, because I do have concern over future years, for future funding for legislatures, because once they make it through 2020 election year, all gloves may be off again. So we may automatically go back to defensive posturing again with our legislature. But I warn our colleagues to make sure we're all thinking through that, of what future years' budgets can come and become from this. Thank you, Ms. Powell, and thank you all the staff.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. Dr. Reich?
Thank you, President Mays. I echo what Mr. Hogg stated on all points, and they're very valid and valuable. Just one question with regard to the property values and the M&O tax rate, and this legislative session having significant tax relief, quote unquote. I think with the valuations increasing as they are, and they're not going to slow anytime real soon, as far as the impact that will be felt by individual homeowners, it's probably not going to feel like a lot of relief, is it?
It may not. We can look at that. We haven't calculated that yet, but we can take we get from TAD the average value residence. We can take that, we can compare that to the average value residence last year, and then apply the 97-cent tax rate, and see how that would compare to $1.04 on last year's value, see what that looks like. We can do that.
Yeah, I just, to Mr. Hogg's point, as far as future years, I don't know. I do believe that there were definitely some politically driven decisions this legislative session, and it may come back to bite them when the voters go, well, wait a minute, I thought we were getting relief out of this. So we do have to stay cognizant for future budgets. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. I don't see any more lights. Thank you once again, Ms. Powell. Really appreciate it. The only thing I'll say, and I don't think this is the first year that I've said this, I think consistently every year I say it. If you look at the expenditure budget, 95% of our budget is spent, as you stated, on payroll and purchases and contract services, yet y'all have continued to find those efficiencies that we need, and I just wonder how much is going to come out of the turnip. So once again, it just explains what an amazing job y'all have done, but at the same time, as Mr. Hogg, Dr. Reich said, and I know my other colleagues believe, we really need to start having those creative conversations for the future, which I think makes it even more difficult this year because there's still so much unknown to do that. So once again, really appreciate the work that y'all are doing. We're now going to move to our discussion action item for the first time. Oh no, third time to the mic. Mrs. Powell.
This will be brief. All right. No. We're almost done here. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned, we're required by law to adopt our budget by the end of June. Before a board can adopt the budget, we have to hold a public hearing on the budget and on the proposed tax rate. Before we can do that, we have to publish a notice in the paper about that hearing. And so all that's set forth in statute, that part has not changed. So we need to publish a notice for a hearing that we expect to have on June 18th. We actually are scheduling the hearing on June 18th about our budget. And so the format of the notice, and I believe you have a copy of it at your place, is set forth by the Texas Comptroller's Office. All right. You heard me say earlier, the changes in House Bill 3 affect that notice even. And so the Comptroller's Office has very specifically already said they don't anticipate having a new notice format for anyone by the end of June. Keep in mind, there are similar notices. They look a little different, but notices also for cities and counties and other entities that set a tax rate. So the Comptroller's Office has to create all for those other entities, the effective tax rate, the rollback rates, all the rules for the disclosure notices. And for us as well, the rules are a little different. So they will not have a new format in place by the end of June. We're being told, use the current format, use the rate that you are expecting to levy. And then if something changes, if they learn of an interpretation or if something is different and we decide after we publish the notice, the House Bill 3 actually contained this statement that said you can come back, you can post an amended notice. You don't have to have another hearing, though. You can just publish the notice, put it on your website, and you're good. This 1 year because of all the changes. But we are asking you tonight to vote on that proposed rate that we would put into the notice so that we can have that hearing on June 18th. Again, we've already seen this slide of our projected property values of $31 billion. They're up by 11.4 cents. Based on that, we anticipate, and based on the requirements in House Bill 3, that we need to levy a tax rate, a total tax rate of $1.29867 next year. That's a 7-cent reduction from this year. So the 7 cents is entirely on the M&O side, where you see that we're reducing from $1.04 to 97 cents. On the debt service side, that's the same. We'll present that budget at the next meeting. but that is based on our current existing debt payments that will be due in the upcoming year and plans to retire some debt early in this upcoming year. And so that's the rate that it will take to do that. So we are asking the board this evening to vote on that proposed rate, just for us to put in the notice, keeping in mind this is not adopting the tax rate. That will take place in August after we get certified values. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mrs. Powell. Do we have any questions and/or prepared motion? Mr. Chapa?
Yeah, thank you for your presentations tonight, Ms. Powell. At this time, I'd like to move approval of a proposed maintenance and operation tax rate of 97 cents and a proposed debt service tax rate of 32.867 cents for the 2019 tax year, for a total proposed tax rate of $1.29.867 cents, which would reduce the total tax rate by 7 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Chapa. Dr. Reich? Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Chapa, a second by Dr. Reich. Is there any discussion? If not, please vote. Okay, everyone present has voted, and it has passed. So we have our proposed 2019 tax rate for required notice of public meeting to discuss budget and proposed tax rate. Thank you, Ms. Powell. Our next discussion action item is to consider the 2019-2020 Student Code of Conduct. If Mr. Hill will please approach the mic.
Good evening, President Mays and Superintendent and Board. We're here this evening to just kind of go over the Student Code of Conduct for the 1920 school year, and got a brief presentation, and then we'll be entertaining any questions that you may have. As we look at the Student Code of Conduct, we always try to align it to board policy and our core beliefs, and AE Local was the anchor for our review of the policy. Of the Code of Conduct. And our process included campus administration, central administrators, teachers, parents, and students to review the proposed changes to the Code of Conduct for the 1920 school year. And those changes were submitted to administration for review, and then ultimately to the Board Governance Committee for further review, and then to the full board for discussion and consideration. The committee, which is there, excuse me, you can see the names, and there's some that were here earlier and they've left. There's a couple here now, Ms. Henson and Ms. Swan are still here now, but I wanted to recognize the committee for their work on this conduct. Some of the recommended changes in the document included defining restorative practices, adding clarifying language about parents' rights to have counsel during student appeals, added the social emotional learning framework to that document. There was a lot of discussion about dress code and the overall general modifications to delete some redundant language and to create a more natural flow to that document. Deletes some language about plunging necklines and cleavage being unacceptable because that presents a zero tolerance perception. The committee was wanting to keep that language, but in further discussion with the Board Governance Committee, there was an emphasis that there is administrator discretion to still address those issues there. Outlines some obscene or offensive apparel, addresses below the waist clothing for female students, and again, just that administrative discretion. The administrative discretion considerations other than those that are specifically discussed in the Code of Conduct, campus administrators and teachers still have the authority to determine whether something is or is not appropriate for dress or any other things that are in the Code of Conduct. So there was a lot of emphasis from the committee about making sure that administrator has discretion. And so you've had an opportunity to review this and its discussion action tonight, but we would recommend that the board approve the Student Code of Conduct as it's presented and it's been reviewed. So that will be open for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Once again, this is a discussion action item. Do we have any questions? Ms. Walton?
Thank you, President Mays. On the addresses, the waist clothing for female students, I thought that was for all students.
The change was for female students. There was, I'm sorry, you're correct. It was for all students with measuring the length, but the change, as I recall, and I'll have to go back and look at that.
Mr. Chapa?
Do you have more questions, Ms. Walton? Okay. This is coming from the Board Governance Committee. We've looked at this over a period of a little over a month now. I think this is the second time it's come back up to the board for discussion, and the changes from our perspective have remained pretty much the same. The Code of Conduct as a whole has some changes in it that Mr. Hill described. Most of the changes from our perspective were in the dress code, mainly meant to streamline it, bring it up to modern day a little bit, but also emphasizing that administrators do have discretion. Obviously, if we remove something from the dress code, we want to de-emphasize that some, but want to let our administrators know that if there is an issue, that those things do remain within their discretion to address as they see fit. This is not meant to limit that in any way, except it shifts sort of the presumption of these things are acceptable to wear unless they do create a distraction to the classroom environment, which we always want our school personnel to have the discretion to address, because as the Code of Conduct makes clear, everybody in the school environment has responsibility for addressing the dress code. And so we want to make sure that we've made it fairer, we've made it a bit more objective, and we want them to be able to do that, but make them more confident when they are administering the dress code.
Thank you, Mr. Chapa. Mr. Hogg?
I think he's going to make a motion. You make it. I'll second it.
And I
Mr.
like
Chopper,
I meant
again.
to conclude by saying that I move for approval of the Code of Conduct as revised.
There's a reason Mr. Chapa wanted to second it. Ms. Mays, I will second it, and I'd like to make one comment after the motion, if I can go ahead.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Mr. Chapa, I just want to commend you for writing and doing a lot of legwork on this to rewrite this. I probably err on the side of much more conservative on how we list things and dress and some of those things, and I be full disclosure, I would love it if we were full uniforms, but that's a whole different story, another different time from what we have. But listen, sometimes I don't always agree with my colleagues, and that's okay up there. I'm still mad. We almost passed that standardized dress years ago, but that's a different story. I can't let it go, Dr. Reich. It's hard right now. I'm a fan of it overall, even though I know there's problems with it. I do, Mr. Chapa, thank you for writing that, because I do think you wrote it to discretion, because what you did hit my hot button is I like to empower our administrators at each campus. I just asked this board and staff to make sure we understand we're empowering our administrators, so we have to be prepared to defend our administrators and also deal with possibly more grievances from parents. I think that's an okay option to there, and I'd ask staff to make sure we understand we are empowering the administrators to be able to make these decisions. We hire very competent leaders on each of our campuses, from our principal to our dean to our assistant principals to our teachers. And there's a chain of command on those campuses, and I hope we empower them and they use the right discretion on those. But Mr. Chapa, thanks for writing this, because I do think it does make logical sense the way we wrote this.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So we had a motion by Mr. Chapa, a second by Mr. Hogg. Ms. Walton?
I just wanted to add to what Mr. Hogg was saying. Yes, it's up to our administrators to be the ultimate decision makers on some of this discretionary things, but it is also up to our students and our parents and our teachers to understand the changes to the dress code and to be sure that students are dressing appropriately for school.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Seeing no other discussion, please vote. All who are present voted in favor to consider the 2019-2020 Student Code of Conduct has passed. Thank you.
Wow, look at that. Yeah, all right. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to our new governance committee, which is chaired by Mr. Chapa, and also seated on that committee is Ms. Walton and Dr. Reich. Thank y'all very much. So.
You got it on the backside.
I said current. I said current.
Yeah. They got the easy one. It's a lot of work a while ago.
Okay, so now we come to our open forum of non-agenda items. Lisa, do we have any cards? Okay, then we will move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Cavazos?
Thank you, President Mays, and share some information about our district. Recently, there's a lot of celebration at the end of the year. During the volunteer luncheon, our amazing volunteers who had 250 to 500 or more volunteer hours. Volunteers were recognized at this luncheon and had a combined 134,000 hours of service. Not the people pictured there, they're just a representative, but there's a whole group of that, and we want to thank them for their work with our teachers and our students. AISD has more than 10,000 approved volunteers currently, so we're very appreciative of them. During the service recognition retirement banquet, we honored employees with 25, 30, 35, and 40 years of service, plus our retirees. The service years recognized a total nearly 3,200 years combined. So that's very interesting. Congratulations to all our employees on their milestones. It's also obviously graduation season, and we've had already a few take place. Our 18-plus students graduated 2 weeks ago. Arlington Collegiate High School graduated second class last week. Our Venture High School students graduated last week as well, bringing their total to about 184 graduates. The rest of class of 2019 graduates Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at College Park. Congratulations ahead of time to all our graduates, and we can't wait to see them cross the stage this weekend. Continuing with our recognitions, our newest Wall of Fame members were inducted in a ceremony, and we had great attendance on that. May the 28th at the PDC, these students and teachers had state or national level honors during the school year, and we're very proud of them. Their photos are displayed in the hallway here at Central Office. We also recognized our top 2% of each graduating class with their most influential educator during the STAR Luncheon, Student Teacher Achievement Recognition Luncheon. It's very nice to hear their recognition of their teachers that made a big impact on their lives. So congratulations to all our students. May Teacher and Department Employee of the Month were also recognized. Congratulations to Efrain Silos from Arlington Collegiate High School, Megan Starkey from Young Junior High, Tracy Smith from Morton, and Karen Kleeman from Special Education. Very, very well-deserved Employees of the Month. Young aspiring artists from 5th and 8th grade, we've moved this now to the 8th grade, the first cohort that went through this program of the stadium art at AT&T Stadium are now 8th graders, and so the Jones family has continued to support them, and so now the 8th graders are part of that as well. And they held their display and reception of art this month, and these 8th graders and their 5th grade counterparts also displayed artwork. So we want to thank the Gene and Jerry Jones Foundation for continuing to support this. We just announced that we were going to continue this through high school. I wasn't sure if they were ready to do that, but they did. So that was a good announcement. Next, I had the privilege to speak at Patrick Elementary with 6th graders recently. This was towards the end of the year, like really close to the end of the year, and they were very attentive for 6th graders at the end of the year at elementary. That's really a challenge. And they were very, very attentive. So we're very proud of our Patrick 6th graders and all our students. Finally, Arlington Police Chief Will Johnson and I spoke to Swift Elementary students for the Take 25 program, where we have a conversation about safety during the summer months and from different perspectives, and taking 25 minutes with their parents to talk about safety plans during the summer, especially when they have more autonomy and freedom. It was a great visit there at Swift Elementary. So with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Cavazos. Are there any school board reports? Dr. Reich.
Thank you, President Mays. I just wanted to let this body know that myself, Mrs. Mays, and Mr. Hogg did attend the Tom Vandergriff Awards of the Arlington Athletics Hall of Honor event, and it was a great event. It's a really good organization. They honored many former coaches, current coaches, athletes. It was very well attended, really good night, and just highlighted the great things going on that have gone on previously and what happens as of today going on in our district with the amazing impact that the athletics does have on our culture here in Arlington ISD. And I'll say a personal shout out to Mrs. Mays and her son Malcolm being the chosen athlete of the year. Is that right? And congratulations there. I know there's a lot of things going on this time of year as he's going to be graduating, but it was nice to be able to see the honors bestowed upon him that evening, as well as all the other athletes and coaches and mentors, et cetera. So looking forward to where that organization moves on into the future. And Mrs. Mays and Mr. Hogg gave a great presentation about athletic opportunities that we have had through our bond programs and in general. And I stood next to them and looked pretty. That was about it. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. You are oh so pretty. Ms. Secretary, do we have any items to consider?
Yes, we've had two requests for staff. One, Mr. Hogg has requested staff to review HB 3906 requirements and bring to the board a discussion item on AISD's progress with implementation. And two, Mr. Hogg has asked that staff re-examine the 2019-20 proposed budget to consider ways to bring down operations deficit of $3.8 million.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. It is 10:55, and we will now move to a closed meeting pursuant to sections 551.071.